Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why being a medieval apprentice often felt like trading childhood for a grueling grind. What you're about to discover might just make you appreciate Monday mornings. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The good old days of medieval apprenticeships. You, dear listener, would start this grand adventure not because you wanted to, but because your parents decided it was time to hand you over to a master craftsman. And forget the teenage years, you're barely into double digits. Yep, by the ripe age of 12, you're off to learn the trade if you're lucky. Some poor souls even started at 7 or 8. That's right. While modern kids are still playing with action figures, you'll be learning how to wield a hammer, and not for fun. So why, you ask, would parents willingly sign their kids up for this? Well, economics, my friend. In medieval Europe, cash wasn't exactly flowing like ale at a tavern. For many families, apprenticeships were a form of social and financial insurance. It's like sending your kid to college, but instead of student debt, you get a chance at a steady job with a side of indentured servitude. Your family might even pay the master a hefty fee, essentially an investment in your future, which sounds more noble than it was. You see, this wasn't just about learning a skill. It was about survival. In a time when the average life expectancy barely scraped past 30, thanks to delightful things like the Black Death and constant warfare, securing a trade was like snagging a golden ticket. And if it meant you had to endure a few years of back-breaking labor and zero pay, well, that was just the cost of doing business. Let's not forget the contracts. You didn't have much of a say in them, mainly because, you were a kid. But even if you could read, which, let's be honest, was unlikely given the literacy rates back then, the fine print wasn't exactly written with clarity. It was more like a medieval version of a tech company's terms and conditions, but with fewer data privacy concerns and more manual labor clauses. These contracts could last anywhere from 2 to 10 years, depending on the trade. Imagine signing up for that kind of commitment today without knowing what you're getting into. Your days would be packed with work from dawn till dusk, 6 days a week. Sundays were rest days, but don't get too excited. Church attendance was mandatory, so you weren't exactly binge-watching Netflix. So, what did you get out of this deal? Food, a place to sleep, and a shot at becoming a master yourself one day. But let's set the record straight. You weren't exactly dining on medieval gourmet. Meals were basic and often involved a lot of bread and pottage, a kind of stew that was more about quantity than quality. And your sleeping arrangements. You'd be lucky if you scored a straw mattress, sharing cramped quarters with fellow apprentices or even animals. But hold on, let's tackle a persistent myth, the romantic notion of the master-apprentice relationship. You might picture a wise old craftsman passing on secrets of the trade like a Jedi master. Reality check. Many masters were more interested in the bottom line than your personal growth. Sure, they'd teach you the skills, but they weren't exactly life coaches. They had their own families to feed and businesses to run, and you were free labor. The societal norms of the time made all this seem, if not ideal, at least acceptable. Back then, the concept of childhood as we know it today didn't exist. You were expected to grow up fast, and contributing to the family's welfare was a top priority. In a way, the apprenticeship system was a precursor to modern vocational training, minus the labor rights, and with a lot more manual scrubbing of floors. So there you are, a pint-sized cog in the medieval machine, with dreams of mastering your trade someday. Your journey's just beginning, and let me tell you, it's not all castles and chivalry. But hey, at least you're not stuck spinning wool with the peasants, right? Instead, you're on the fast track to becoming a master craftsman, or so you hope. Welcome to the hustle and bustle of a medieval apprentice's life, where your day kicks off not with a double espresso, but with the crow of a rooster. That's right, you're up at the crack of dawn, ready to dive into the kind of grind that makes modern internships look like a holiday in the Maldives. Your daily agenda, let's break it down. The workday stretches from sunrise to sunset, which in the summer can mean up to 16 hours of non-stop action. And by action, I mean hauling water, sweeping the workshop, and other thrilling tasks that make filing paperwork seem exhilarating. Forget about lunch breaks or coffee runs. Your meals are quick pit, starts fueled by whatever scraps are available. If you're lucky, you can snag some bread and cheese, but don't hold your breath for anything Michelin-starred. Living conditions. Well, if you think your first college dorm was cramped, try sharing a tiny, often windowless room with a bunch of other apprentices. Privacy is as rare as a dragon's egg, and personal space is a foreign concept. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, unwashed clothes, and sometimes even livestock, because why not throw a goat into the mix? Sanitation is a luxury you can't afford, and with the Black Plague lurking in the not-so-distant future, it's no wonder bathing wasn't a high priority. Your diet is a medieval game of survival of the fittest. Bread made from barley or rye is your staple. Meat, forget it unless your master's feeling generous or you've caught a rat in the pantry. Sometimes you get a hearty bowl of pottage, a stew-like concoction that's heavy on the vegetables and light on everything else. It's like living on a perpetual cleanse diet, minus the Instagram bragging rights. Discipline. Oh, the masters had that covered. Medieval apprentices faced a rulebook thicker than a Game of Thrones novel. Masters were tasked with more than just teaching a trade. They were also your makeshift moral compass. Step out of line, and you'd face punishments that were a mix of medieval creativity and sheer cruelty. We're talking about everything from verbal reprimands to physical beatings, with the infamous rod of correction. And no, this wasn't a euphemism for a stern talking to. It's amazing how the threat of a leather strap could motivate you to memorize every detail of the craft, including those pesky safety procedures. Some masters got downright inventive with their disciplinary methods. Ever heard of the pillory? It was basically a medieval version of public shaming, where you'd be locked up in a wooden frame for everyone to gawk at, like a human display at a zoo. And don't even think about running away. If you did manage to escape, you'd likely find yourself branded as a fugitive, with all the perks of a medieval manhunt minus the social media outrage. But here's the kicker. Despite all this, apprenticeships were still seen as a golden opportunity. In a world where social mobility was about as likely as a unicorn sighting, securing a trade was like winning the medieval lottery. Sure, you might have to endure a few years of back-breaking labor and questionable hygiene, but the end game was worth it. You'd emerge from this trial by fire with the skills and connections to possibly, just maybe, open your own workshop someday. It's easy to romanticize the notion of a master imparting wisdom like a sage in a medieval movie montage. The reality was often a harsh mix of exploitation and education, but let's not completely discredit the system. For many, this grueling rite of passage was the ticket out of poverty, a way to ensure you weren't destined to till the fields or beg in the streets. And in a society where the divide between rich and poor was as vast as the English Channel, that was no small feat. So, while it might have sucked to be a medieval apprentice, it also held the promise of a better future. The chance to rise through the ranks, to someday stand as a master of your own trade, dangling the same carrot of opportunity to the next generation of wide-eyed, slightly terrified young apprentices. But let's not get too carried away just yet. There's still plenty more to unpack in this saga of sweat, toil, and the occasional triumph. In the meantime, just be glad you've got indoor plumbing and weekends off. And speaking of sweat, toil, and triumph, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of what medieval apprentices were actually learning. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about swinging hammers and weaving baskets. Becoming a master craftsman was like earning a PhD in manual labor, minus the fancy graduation ceremony. First up, blacksmithing. Ah, the blacksmith. Every medieval village version of a fix-it shop, and quite literally the backbone of the community. If something was metal, chances are a blacksmith had a hand in creating or repairing it. From horseshoes to weapons, this trade was as crucial to the medieval economy as smartphones are to today's. Apprentices in this field learned to work with bellows, anvils, and hammers to forge iron and steel. They'd spend years perfecting the art of heating metal to just the right temperature. Too little, and it's useless. Too much, and it's a melted mess. Now, let's talk numbers. An anvil alone could weigh upwards of 500 pounds, and a single horseshoe might cost a few pence. Small change today, but in an era where a penny could buy you a loaf of bread, it was significant. Mastering these skills took years, and that's not even counting the calluses and burns you'd collect along the way. But if you could stick it out, you'd be making items that were in constant demand, ensuring a steady stream of work and income. Then there was weaving. If you think today's fashion industry is cutthroat, medieval weaving was a whole different beast. Fabric production was a labor-intensive process, requiring knowledge of spinning, dyeing, and of course, weaving. Apprentices had to master the loom, a device that was about as user-friendly as a 1980s computer. It wasn't just about making cloth, it was about making the right cloth. Wool and linen were the staples, with wool being the more valuable. A well-made woolen tunic could be the medieval equivalent of a designer suit. Weaving, like blacksmithing, was essential to the local and even international economy. England, for example, became wealthy largely due to its wool trade. By the 14th century, wool exports accounted for a significant portion of the country's income, and apprentices who mastered the craft could find themselves in the lucrative position of producing goods for trade. But before you start thinking that all apprentices were on a sure path to success, let's throw in a dash of reality: guild politics. Ah yes, the medieval version of office politics, but with more velvet robes and less caffeine. Guilds were powerful associations controlling the quality and price of goods. They had rules tighter than a pair of medieval tights, and moving up the ranks often meant navigating a minefield of guild regulations and economic downturns. Imagine you've just spent 7 years slaving away, and you're finally ready to submit your masterpiece to the guild. Requirement to become a master craftsman. But wait, the guild's in a mood. Maybe there's been a bad harvest, or the market's flooded with too many goods. Suddenly, your masterpiece is not up to their standards. Or worse, they've decided there's just no room for another master. Back to the grind you go. And let's not forget the external factors, like wars, plagues, and famines, that could derail even the most promising careers. The Black Death, for instance, wiped out a third of Europe's population in the 14th century, creating labor shortages, but also reducing markets. Your skills might be top-notch, but if there's no one left to buy your goods, you're out of luck. Still, despite the odds, the possibility of social mobility was the carrot that kept many apprentices going. In a rigidly structured society, the chance to rise above your birth status was as rare as finding a unicorn in the local tavern. And while the system was unfair and brutally harsh, for those who succeeded, the rewards could be great. A master craftsman had respect, influence, and the ability to pass down his trade to the next generation, creating a legacy in an era where most people's life stories were forgotten as quickly as they were written. So, as you can see, the path from apprentice to master was a gauntlet of hard work, skill, and a fair bit of luck. It was a system that combined the promise of opportunity with the harsh realities of medieval life. And while it might not have been the romantic journey often portrayed in movies, it was a vital part of the social and economic fabric of the time. But don't hang up your apron just yet. There's more to this medieval saga, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around for the next chapter. Now, let's dive into the medieval world where the guilds ruled the roost, and they weren't just there to throw lavish banquets and darn snazzy robes. Though, let's admit, those velvet numbers were pretty impressive. Guilds were the medieval equivalent of a mix between a trade union and the mafia, holding the keys to everything from market prices to trade secrets. If you thought your HR department had too much power, you'd find guilds downright terrifying. Picture this. You've spent years toiling away as an apprentice, dreaming of the day you'll open shop and hang your shingle. But first, you've got to play the guild game. These crafty collectives controlled who could practice which trade and where. In fact, stepping outside their tightly woven rules was a one-way ticket to professional oblivion. And let's not forget the guild's role as gatekeepers of trade secrets. Ever wonder how medieval masons managed to build those sky-high cathedrals? Well, they weren't just winging it. Guild secrets were as closely guarded as the recipes in a grandma's cookbook. To become a master craftsman, you had to present a masterpiece to the guild. A trial by fire, only less fiery and more judgmental. If they liked what they saw, congratulations. You were in. If not, back to the grindstone. This was no small feat, considering a masterpiece could take months, if not years, to perfect. The guilds were the ultimate arbiters of quality, ensuring that only the best goods made it to market. But they were also the ultimate monopoly, fixing prices and regulating who could sell what, where, and when. Now, let's talk about guild dues. These were the medieval version of HOA fees, but instead of sprucing up the communal garden, you were buying your way into a tightly knit network of business connections. Miss a payment, and you could kiss your career goodbye. And if you thought modern business networking was a slog, try doing it medieval style, through endless feasts, ceremonies, and of course more feasts. It was a tough life, but hey, at least the wine flowed freely. But guilds weren't all shadowy dealings and velvet cloaks. They provided a certain level of stability in a world where economic chaos was as common as a rain-soaked English summer. By regulating trade, they ensured that goods were of a consistent quality, which was crucial when a bad batch of ironwork could mean the difference between a secure castle gate and a pile of rubble. So, what did this mean for the communities of the time? Well, apprenticeships weren't just about learning skills. They were about embedding oneself into the social fabric of medieval life. Becoming a craftsman meant becoming a part of something larger, a community where your success was intertwined with the success of others. The guilds ensured that tradespeople were not just lone wolves. They were part of a pack, and that pack looked out for its own. Now let's switch gears to the home front. Back in the day, parents didn't just see apprenticeships as a way to get their kids out of the house. No, this was an all-in gamble for future security. In an era where retirement plans were as mythical as dragons, parents bet their future on their children's success. It was like medieval stock investing, where the dividends came in the form of room, board, and care in your twilight years. The decision to apprentice a child wasn't made lightly. It involved contracts, negotiations, and often a hefty fee. Families were essentially paying for their kids to learn a trade, hoping that someday their offspring would return the favor by supporting them in their old age. And if the child succeeded, it wasn't just a win for them. It was a win for the entire family. Imagine the pride of having a son or daughter who was a master craftsman, respected and financially stable. It was the medieval equivalent of having a kid who made it big in Silicon Valley. But the pressure was real. These kids carried the weight of their family's future on their shoulders. Failure wasn't just personal, it was communal. If they flunked out of their apprenticeship, it wasn't just their dreams that were dashed. It was their parents' hopes of a comfortable old age. This kind of pressure would make any modern helicopter parent look relaxed. And let's not forget the siblings left behind. Suddenly, family dynamics shifted. The apprentice might be away for years, and during that time, the remaining children had to pick up the slack. The farm didn't run itself, and neither did the household. This familial reshuffling meant that everyone had to adjust, often leading to the kind of sibling rivalries that would put any reality TV show to shame. But despite the challenges, the apprenticeship system was a critical cog in the medieval machine. It was a way to ensure that skills and trades were passed down through generations, maintaining a stable economy and a semblance of social order. It was a system that, while flawed, offered a glimmer of hope in a world where certainty was a rare commodity. So there you have it, the tangled web of medieval apprenticeships, a mix of opportunity, exploitation, and social engineering. It was a system as complex as the cathedrals it helped build, with layers of intrigue, ambition, and survival. And while it might seem harsh by today's standards, it was an essential part of medieval life, shaping not just individual careers, but entire communities. And as we continue to unravel this historical tapestry, remember, there's more to this tale of toil and triumph than meets the eye. Stay tuned, because the saga is far from over. But before we pop the champagne and crown every medieval apprentice a success story, let's pull back the tapestry and take a hard look at the real deal. Spoiler alert, that shiny path from apprentice to master was more like a treacherous climb up a mountainside with a backpack full of rocks. Yes, a handful of apprentices did make it to the top, and they are the ones who get all the glorious press. You know, the medieval equivalent of making it big in Hollywood. But most apprentices were more likely to end up scrubbing floors than swinging a hammer with authority. While some might dream of becoming the next great master, the harsh reality was that only about 1 in 10 actually ascended to that coveted status. And that's being generous. Why so grim, you ask? Well, let's start with the economic straitjacket that was medieval Europe. Resources were limited, and demand didn't always match the supply of eager young hands. Your chances of making it big were about as slim as finding a dragon's egg in your backyard. The guilds, while ostensibly there to support tradesmen, often acted as gatekeepers with a penchant for slamming doors. And let's talk about those masterpieces you had to produce to be considered a master. We're not talking about whipping up a quick project in your garage. Nope, these were intricate, time-consuming creations that required not just skill, but also access to expensive materials. Materials your average apprentice could hardly afford. Imagine a broke college student trying to fund a startup. Except instead of venture capitalists, you had guild masters scrutinizing your every move, ready to pounce on any flaw. But what about those rare few who did make it? They were the exception, not the rule. Often, they had a bit of luck, a sprinkle of connections, and maybe a touch of nepotism. Having a family tie to a guild member, pure gold. It's no coincidence that many who rose to become masters were sons of masters or had other familial links to power players in the trade. Let's not forget the external chaos. Wars, plagues, and famines were frequent party crashers in the medieval world. The Black Death, for instance, didn't just wreak havoc on the population, it also twisted the labor market into a pretzel. After it swept through, labor was in short supply, driving up wages for those who survived. But it also meant fewer buyers for the goods apprentices were learning to produce. Talk about a double-edged sword. Now, fast forward to today's job market. Sure, you might feel like an unpaid intern fetching coffee and updating spreadsheets, but at least you're not living in a straw-filled shack with livestock as roommates. Modern internships, for all their flaws, come with the promise of networking events, LinkedIn connections, and the occasional free lunch. Plus, there's the invaluable perk of labor laws, something medieval apprentices could only dream of in their wildest, fever-induced fantasies. In today's world, the path from entry-level to CEO might still feel daunting, but at least it's not bogged down by guild dues or public shaming devices. You have access to online courses, mentorship programs, and if you're lucky, a boss who doesn't wield a rod of correction. The medieval apprentice had no such luxuries. They faced a brutal game of survival, where even the most skilled could find themselves out of luck due to factors far beyond their control. So, the next time you're cursing the office printer or groaning about a work deadline, take a moment to appreciate the relative comforts of modern career building. Sure, it's no walk in the park, but compared to the mud-splattered, disease-ridden streets of medieval towns, you've got it pretty good. As we wrap up this journey through the trials and tribulations of medieval apprenticeships, let's not romanticize the past too much. While there's a certain charm to the idea of learning a craft at the feet of a master, the reality was often a harsh mix of exploitation and opportunity. It was a system that, despite its flaws, laid the groundwork for modern vocational training and professional development. But perhaps the most enduring lesson from the medieval apprenticeship saga is the sheer resilience of those who endured it. These young apprentices were more than just cogs in the economic machine. They were the backbone of their communities, keeping the wheels of industry turning even in the face of adversity. They remind us of the indomitable human spirit and the age-old quest for something better. So here's to the apprentices who toiled, dreamed, and occasionally triumphed against the odds. Their stories, though often untold, are woven into the fabric of history, reminding us that every master was once a novice, and every journey, no matter how arduous, begins with a single step. The sun has barely crested the horizon, and already you're greeted by the heady perfume of medieval siege camp life, an olfactory cocktail of stale bread, unwashed bodies, and a lingering hint of hopelessness. Quite the wake-up call, isn't it? This is no five-star hotel, my friend, unless your idea of luxury is a cold, hard patch of ground and a breakfast that's more survival challenge than continental buffet. You roll over and spart your breakfast, an offensively stale hunk of bread that's as hard as a knight's conscience. If fortune smiles upon you, there's a mug of ale that's been warming in the sun since yesterday. Now you're probably thinking, ale for breakfast? Really? Well, yes, because clean water is as rare as a dragon sighting. And besides, the mild buzz helps dull the horrors of the day. Bon appetit. Let's talk logistics, because feeding an army is no small feat. Take a city the size of London today and plop it down in the 14th century. That medieval metropolis could hold around 80,000 souls. Now imagine trying to feed an army of a similar size camped outside the stone walls of your enemy. That's your reality. You might think soldiers are getting gourmet meals delivered by a medieval Uber Eats, but the truth is far grimmer. The typical menu: bread, salt pork, maybe some dried peas if you're really living it up. And remember, this fine dining experience comes at a cost. By the late Middle Ages, a soldier's daily food ration could run you about a groat, a small silver coin equivalent to 4 pennies. To put it in perspective, that could be half a day's wage for a laborer. So every bite of that hard bread is like chewing on your paycheck. But you're not alone in this culinary adventure. Enter the camp followers. These aren't just tag-alongs. They're the lifeline of the army. Women, children, and even some entrepreneurial men who saw the siege not as a death trap, but as a golden opportunity to make some coin, selling everything from food to weapon repairs to companionship. They're the unsung logistics team, keeping the troops fed and clothed. Without them, the whole outfit would fall apart faster than a siege tower under arrow fire. Now, why all the fuss about breakfast? Well, the morning meal sets the tone. You're not charging into battle on an empty stomach, unless you fancy keeling over from hunger before even seeing the whites of the enemy's eyes. And trust me, the enemy's eyes are the least of your worries when dysentery is lurking around every corner like a vengeful ghost. The scarcity of provisions is a constant specter. Armies often traveled with large supply trains. Think hundreds of wagons, carrying everything from food to armor. In fact, in 1346, Edward Roman III Army required about 20,000 carts just to lug around their necessities during the 100 Years' War. That's a logistical nightmare that would make a modern supply chain manager break out in a cold sweat. The economic implications are staggering. Wars weren't just fought with swords and siege towers. They were battles of bank accounts, too. Kings and commanders needed deep pockets or generous patrons to keep the wheels turning. Imagine the costs of feeding thousands of mouths daily, not to mention the equipment and paying the soldiers. It was said that a single day of siege could cost a lord the equivalent of a small fortune, enough to buy an entire village. So, when you nibble on that bread, know it's part of an elaborate economic dance where one wrong step could send the whole operation spiraling into chaos. And let's not forget the political backdrop. Siege warfare was as much about saving face as it was about military strategy. It wasn't just about capturing a castle. It was about showing the world who's boss. The prestige of victory could elevate a noble's status, while failure could send them packing in disgrace. The stakes were high, and everyone knew it. But let's snap back to your morning routine. As you gnaw on your bread and sip your tepid ale, you might catch snippets of conversation. The soldiers gripe about the lack of food, the endless waiting, or the latest rumors from the front. There's talk of the enemy's strength, the size of their forces. Some men are already sharpening their swords, while others try to catch a few more winks of sleep before the day's chaos begins in earnest. All this, and the day's barely started. If you thought the morning was tough, just wait until you see what the afternoon holds. But for now, savor the peace and quiet, because in a medieval siege camp, tranquility is more fleeting than a summer's day in England. As you finish digesting the meager breakfast, your morning routine awaits, and oh boy, it's not a spa day. If you've ever romanticized the life of a medieval knight, envisioning polished armor and noble deeds, prepare for a reality check. The daily grind of a siege camp would make even the most chivalrous knight question his life choices. Let's dive into the delightful world of medieval hygiene, or more accurately, the lack thereof. First stop on this sensory tour, your tent, the closest thing to home sweet home in this muddy mess. Now, forget any notions of crisp linen and lavender-scented pillows. We're talking damp, scratchy wool and the unmistakable aroma of unwashed bodies. You see, a medieval siege camp is like a petri dish of filth and disease. Bathing is rarer than a dragon's siding, and soap is an exotic luxury, not a daily necessity. Lice are your constant companions, and not in that friendly, "Hey buddy, how was your day?" kind of way. These little critters are more like the annoying roommate who never leaves. In fact, archaeological digs have uncovered lice combs in abundance, suggesting that delousing was as routine as brushing your teeth today. If you're lucky, you might get your hands on one of these combs in the camp's makeshift market. But even then, it's a temporary reprieve from the itch fest that is your scalp. Now, let's talk about the camp market, a bustling hub of medieval commerce where necessity meets opportunity. Need a clean tunic? That'll cost you, and it's not cheap. A basic wool tunic could set you back a few shillings, a small fortune when you consider that a skilled worker might earn just a penny or two a day. The market is a place where the entrepreneurial spirit thrives amidst the smell of sweat and desperation. Whether it's a fresh pair of boots or a rare sachet of lavender to mask the pungent odors, everything has a price. And believe me, nothing is more prized than a whiff of something that doesn't smell like defeat. Disease is as much a part of camp life as the mud underfoot. Dysentery, typhus, and the ominous camp fever are more feared than any enemy soldier. The lack of sanitation is a major culprit. Toilets, if you can call them that, are little more than pits in the ground, often overflowing and perilously close to the water supply. It's a breeding ground for illness, and without modern medicine, your best hope is literally hoping for the best. Yet, amidst the grime and disease, there exists a certain camaraderie, a shared endurance of hardship that bonds soldiers and camp followers alike. You might hear a grizzled veteran sharing tales of past sieges, embellishing each story with acts of bravery and narrow escapes. These stories are part of the camp's folklore, providing a sense of identity and purpose in the midst of chaos. They're the glue that holds the morale together, even as the stench of decay threatens to unravel it. While we're debunking myths, let's shine a light on the so-called chivalrous knight. Picture a gallant figure, armor gleaming under the sun, a paragon of virtue and honor. Now, strip away the Hollywood gloss. The reality: a knight is just as likely to be covered in mud and grime, his armor dented and rusting. He's a warrior, yes, but also a man who hasn't bathed in weeks, battling not just enemies, but the insidious creep of gangrene and infection from even the smallest wound. The medieval siege camp is a world where survival is the name of the game. It's a place where soldiers dream of glory while wading through the muck of everyday life. The harshness of the environment breeds resilience, but also a certain fatalism. After all, the camp is a microcosm of medieval society, a mix of social classes, economic transactions, and the ever-present specter of death. As you maneuver through this world, the camp's rhythm becomes your own. The distant clang of blacksmiths, the hum of traders haggling over prices, and the occasional outburst of laughter remind you that life, though harsh, persists. You begin to understand that the siege is not just a military tactic, but a way of life, a relentless grind that tests the limits of human endurance. So, as you don your lice-ridden tunic and step out into the morning fog, remember, you're not just part of a siege, you're part of history. A history where the reality was far grimmer than the romantic tales of old. And while the legends may live on in storybooks, the truth of life in a medieval siege camp is etched in the mud beneath your feet and the stale air you breathe. That's the price of survival in the Middle Ages, a world where even the simplest act of staying alive is an epic battle in its own right. And just when you think you've got a handle on this medieval circus, the sun climbs higher, dragging you into a crash course on medieval military tactics. Forget the sword fights choreographed to perfection in your favorite movies. This is a world where brute force and brain power come together in the form of engineering marvels. Enter the trebuchet, the medieval answer to how do we break down that wall over there. First off, let's dispel the romantic notion that a siege is some kind of endless nightly tourney. Spoiler alert, it's not about individual glory. In reality, it's more akin to a construction site crossed with a demolition derby. Just replace the hard hats and bulldozers with helmets and wooden beams. These siege engines, like the trebuchet, were less weapons and more physics experiments gone rogue. Picture a giant slingshot, but instead of flinging pebbles at your kid brother, it's hurling boulders the size of small cars over castle walls. Building one of these bad boys might make you reconsider your complaints about IKEA furniture. The process required an army of carpenters and laborers, not to mention a small forest's worth of timber. We're talking beams that could be up to 60 feet long, and take note, these aren't your standard 2x4. Each trebuchet could weigh as much as 15 tons when fully assembled, and that's not factoring in the rocks and other delightful projectiles would lob at the enemy. And let's not forget the manpower. Operating a trebuchet wasn't a one-man show. It required a team of up to 60 people just to caulk the thing. It was the ultimate team-building exercise, except instead of trust falls, you had to ensure no one was crushed by a swinging counterweight. Friendly fire wasn't just a distant possibility, it was a looming threat. Miscalculations could send a boulder crashing down on your own camp, and suddenly your biggest problem isn't the enemy, but your own trebuchet trying to take you out. Now, let's talk costs, because this heavy artillery didn't come cheap. A single trebuchet could cost a lord the equivalent of an entire year's revenue from a small estate. Imagine a modern military spending millions on a tank, only to have it roll backward into friendly lines because someone forgot to release the brake. That's medieval warfare for you, a fine line between genius and disaster. While the trebuchet steals the show, it's not the only player in this siege game. There were also battering rams, siege towers, and ballistae, each with their own special way of ruining someone's day. Siege towers, in particular, were engineering nightmares. These towering wooden structures could stand over 40 feet tall and required weeks to construct. They were essentially mobile skyscrapers designed to roll up to the enemy walls and disgorge soldiers onto the battlements. Here's the kicker. All this effort could be for naught if the defenders had a decent supply of burning oil or well-aimed arrows to set your precious tower ablaze. No fire department to call, no stop, drop, and roll drills, just wooden towers going up in flames faster than your plans for a quiet siege. In the grand scheme of things, these siege engines were about more than just brute force. They were statements of power, symbols of a lord's ambition and resources. Having the biggest, baddest trebuchet wasn't just about winning the day, it was about sending a message. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair, as one might say. And while we're talking about messages, let's not ignore the psychological warfare at play. A well-placed boulder crashing through a wall wasn't just about creating a breach, it was a morale crusher. Defenders would watch as their defenses crumbled, knowing their doom might be sealed not by swords, but by the relentless physics of a trebuchet. Meanwhile, the attackers would cheer each successful shot, their spirits buoyed by the prospect of victory. But before you get too caught up in this medieval arms race, remember that these massive constructions often became the ultimate test of patience. Weeks could pass as you waited for the enemy's walls to finally give way. It was a slow, grinding process, more a test of endurance than any quick, glorious battle. For the soldiers on both sides, every day was a gamble, with hunger, disease, and the ever-present threat of attack hanging over them like a storm cloud. As you watch the trebuchet crew sweat under the midday sun, you begin to see the siege for what it truly is. A brutal siege of wills, where the real battle is often against time, the elements, and the limits of human endurance. It's a reminder that medieval warfare wasn't just about strength of arms, but the strength of resolve, a grueling chess match played out with blood and stone. This is the world you inhabit, a place where glory is as fleeting as the next meal, and survival is the only constant. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and glance at the looming silhouette of the fortress you're trying to conquer, remember this. In the grand theater of war, the real drama unfolds not in the clash of swords, but in the ceaseless struggle to endure, adapt, and prevail in a world that seems determined to swallow you whole. And just like that, the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, signaling yet another chapter in this relentless saga. Stick around, because the day's far from over, and there's plenty more history to unfold. As the afternoon sun dips lazily across the sky, casting long shadows over the siege camp, you find yourself trapped in a peculiar limbo. It's the medieval version of a slow-motion movie scene, a mix of anticipation, dread, and quite frankly, soul-crushing boredom. Welcome to the afternoon entertainment, where tedium and terror are the main acts, and you never quite know which will take center stage. Let's talk about that psychological seesaw. On one hand, you've got the monotony of waiting. Siege warfare is less about constant action and more about the patience of a Zen master. Days, weeks, sometimes even months could drag on, with little more than the daily routine of maintaining weapons, tending to the camp, and trying not to catch something terminal from the guy next to you. It's a test of patience that could make even the most steadfast monk consider a career change. But before you start snoozing in those itchy woolen tunics, the siege camp has its own brand of pop-up entertainment. Enter the jesters and minstrels, the medieval equivalent of Netflix, providing much-needed distraction from the grim reality of war. Picture this, a jester juggling daggers while cracking jokes that would make your grandma blush, all while trying not to trip over the uneven ground. Their antics might seem frivolous, but they serve a crucial purpose, lifting spirits and keeping the camp from descending into a morass of despair. And let's not forget the minstrels, armed with lutes and a repertoire of ballads and tales that can transport you, if only for a moment, to a world beyond the muddy trenches. They sing of legendary heroes and far-off lands, weaving a tapestry of myth and melody that reminds you why you're fighting in the first place. Sure, it's a bit of escapism, but who doesn't need a little distraction when the alternative is staring at the same patch of sky for the 1000th time? Now, while jesters and minstrels attempt to entertain, other forces are at play in this high-stakes game of chess. Enter espionage, the shadowy underbelly of siege warfare, where strategy meets subterfuge. Forget the glamorous spies of modern law. Medieval espionage was more about bribing the right guard or intercepting a messenger than high-tech gadgets and tuxedos. Take the case of the siege of Kaffa in 1346, where the besieging Mongols catapulted plague-infected corpses over the city walls. Talk about a psychological tactic. Nothing says surrender quite like a rain of diseased bodies. It's a grim reminder that siege warfare wasn't just about military might. It was a battle of wits, where the sharpest mind could turn the tide. And when it comes to keeping morale high, commanders had to get creative. One popular tactic: propaganda. Leaflets, albeit primitive, were sometimes tossed over enemy walls, promising leniency for surrender or sowing seeds of doubt about a leader's capability. Psychological warfare, my friend, a weapon as potent as any sword. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality is that these tactics were often a last resort, a desperate bid to break the stalemate of siege warfare. When the waiting game stretched too long, tempers flared, and the threat of mutiny loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. You see, there's only so much stale bread, and dysentery one can endure before questioning the point of it all. To manage this simmering part of discontent, leaders sometimes employed unusual morale-boosting tactics. Picture a feast thrown with whatever meager supplies could be spared, a chance to rally the troops and remind them of the camaraderie that binds them. Or maybe a mock tournament, where knights could indulge in a bit of friendly competition, a battered armor clanging like wind chimes in a storm. These diversions were more than mere distractions. They were vital to maintaining the delicate balance of morale. A happy soldier is a loyal soldier, or at least one less likely to stab you in your sleep. And in a siege camp, that happiness often hinged on the smallest of victories: a shared laugh, a song well sung, a glimpse of humanity amidst the chaos. Yet, as the sun sinks lower, casting an orange glow over the weary encampment, you're reminded that the terror of siege warfare is never far away. When night falls, the real drama begins. Night raids, surprise attacks, and the ever-present threat of an enemy breach keep nerves on edge. The air is thick with tension, every rustle in the dark a potential harbinger of doom. In the end, the siege is a crucible, testing not just the strength of arms, but the resilience of the human spirit. It's a battle fought as much in the mind as on the battlefield, where the true victors are those who can endure the waiting, the fear, and the endless grind. So, as you sit by the flickering light of a campfire, surrounded by comrades who share your plight, you begin to understand what it means to be part of this medieval saga. A tale of endurance, courage, and the unyielding will to survive. And just like that, another day in the siege camp draws to a close, the embers of the fire mirroring the resolve in your heart. But don't get too comfortable. The story's not over yet. The night is young, and the siege is just warming up. The sun has finally dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted with the deep hues of twilight. It's a time when the siege camp transforms, shedding its skin of daytime toil for the tentative embrace of evening reprieve. But don't get too excited. This isn't some medieval version of a candlelit dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. More like a rustic gathering where the main course is a hearty serving of reality mixed with a side of gruel. Ah, gruel, the culinary highlight of your evening. Forget about turkey legs and goblets of fine wine. Those belong in the realms of fantasy. This is a meal fit for a medieval soldier, which is to say, barely fit for anyone. If you're lucky, it's a thin porridge made from oatmeal or barley, seasoned with a pinch of salt for that extra kick. It's as bland as it sounds, but it's one of the few staples you can count on to fill your belly, more or less. Now, as you huddle around the campfire with your comrades, bowl in hand, let's talk social dynamics. If you thought medieval society was a rigid hierarchy, you haven't seen anything yet. The camp is a microcosm of the feudal world outside its muddy boundaries. At the top, you have the knights and nobles, the so-called chivalrous warriors whose armor glints even under the pale moonlight. Their tents are larger, their rations slightly more generous, and their sense of superiority firmly intact. Below them are the foot soldiers, the backbone of the army. These are the men who, quite literally, do the heavy lifting, from pushing siege towers to manning trebuchets. They're the ones whose names don't make the history books, but whose sweat and blood turn the gears of war. They might grumble about their lot, but there's a fierce camaraderie among them, forged in the shared hardships of camp life. And then there are the camp followers, the unsung heroes who keep the whole operation afloat. They might not wear armor, but they possess a different kind of resilience. Women, children, and the occasional opportunistic merchant all contribute to the camp's economy and morale. They sell wares, mend clothes, and yes, offer companionship to lonely soldiers. In many ways, they're the glue holding this ragtag community together. As you sip your gruel, there's a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. The day's work is done, for now, but the night holds its own challenges. You swap stories with your fellow soldiers, tales of battles fought and victories won. Some are true, others embellished, but all serve to remind you of the world beyond the camp's perimeter. It's a ritual as old as war itself, a way to find meaning and connection in the midst of chaos. But let's not romanticize it too much. The truth is, when the stories end and the fire burns low, you're left with the harsh realities of camp life. The mud underfoot is a constant reminder that you're not in some grand adventure, but a test of endurance. Disease lurks in every corner, and the specter of death is as much a part of the camp as the tents and fires. It's a sobering thought, and one that keeps you grounded, even as you dream of better days. Speaking of dreams, let's debunk the myth of the noble knight, returning to a hero's welcome. It's a tale as old as time. The gallant warrior, battle-weary but victorious, riding back to cheering crowds and grateful lords. Reality check. The knight's welcome is more likely to be a lukewarm bowl of gruel and a bed of lice-infested straw. The camp isn't a place of triumph. It's a breeding ground for disease and fatigue, where even the most celebrated warrior is just another body trying to survive. Take the example of the siege of Antioch during the First Crusade. After months of grueling warfare, the knights didn't return to a ticker-tape parade. Instead, they faced starvation and disease, with many perishing not at the hands of the enemy, but from the harsh conditions that greeted them upon their triumphant return. It's a stark reminder that in medieval warfare, the real enemy often wasn't the opposing army, but the relentless grind of survival itself. As the camp settles down for the night, you find yourself reflecting on the bigger picture. Sieges weren't just military endeavors. They were transformative events that shaped medieval society and warfare. They were crucibles of innovation and desperation, where necessity drove invention and desperation fueled determination. The trebuchet, the siege tower, these weren't just weapons. They were symbols of human ingenuity and the lengths we'll go to when pushed to the brink. But perhaps the most profound legacy of siege warfare is its impact on the human spirit. It taught resilience, patience, and the power of community. In the face of overwhelming odds, people found ways to adapt, to endure, and to find moments of joy amidst the struggle. It's a testament to the indomitable will to survive, a lesson that echoes through the ages. So, as you lay your head down on that lumpy straw pillow, take a moment to appreciate the modern comforts we often take for granted. Running water, fresh food, a warm bed. These are luxuries that would have been unimaginable to the soldiers of a medieval siege camp. It's a stark contrast that highlights just how far we've come, and yet how much remains the same. For in the end, the story of a medieval siege camp is a story of humanity itself, of our struggles, our triumphs, and our unyielding spirit. It's a reminder that while the world may change, the essence of what it means to be human remains constant. So, sleep well, my friend, and carry these lessons with you, for they are as much a part of our history as the stones of any ancient castle. Nestled in the heart of the chilly 17th century, Gustavus Adolphus was about to get an unexpected promotion, King of Sweden at the tender age of 17. If you think teenage years are tough, try managing a kingdom while still figuring out how to shave. It was 1611, and suddenly, young Gustavus found himself in the heart seat, right in the middle of the Kalmar War, a delightful little conflict with Denmark-Norway. Talk about being thrown into the deep end. Gustavus had to swap his textbooks for treaties, and his teenage angst for the chaos of realpolitik. But let's hit rewind for a moment. The future Lion of the North was born on December 9, 1594, in the regal halls of Stockholm. His parents, King Charles Roman IX and Christina of Hallstein-Gardorp, had big plans, or at least their advisors did. Expected to be the golden child of Swedish royalty, Gustavus didn't disappoint, though he had a flair for the unexpected. While other royal kids might have been playing with wooden swords, Gustavus was busy mastering Latin, German, Dutch, French, and Italian. Pretty handy when you're destined to negotiate with half of Europe. His multilingual skills were more impressive than a polyglot parrot. Education-wise, Gustavus was no slouch. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he received an education that was cutting-edge for the time. His tutors ensured he was well-versed in military tactics and government, setting him up for a career that would involve a lot more than just ceremonial ribbon-cutting. This was a young man who could debate philosophy one minute and lead a cavalry charge the next. It was like grooming a chess prodigy who could also bench press a horse. Back to 1611, the transition to kingship was like being handed the keys to a very old, very temperamental car. The kind that might explode if you so much as looked at it funny. Gustavus inherited not just a throne, but a pile of political rubble. His father had left Sweden in a bit of a bind, embroiled in the Kalmar War against Denmark-Norway. The Danes had been a thorn in Sweden's side for as long as anyone could remember, and now it was up to Gustavus to clean up the mess. No pressure, right? Young Gustavus had to hit the ground running. Denmark-Norway was not a trivial opponent, and the Kalmar War was about as pleasant as a root canal without anesthesia. But Gustavus wasn't just any teenager. He was an old soul in a young, armor-clad body, ready to prove himself worthy of the crown, before the ink on his coronation papers was even dry. His first order of business, proving he wasn't just a kid playing dress-up. Stakes were higher than a Swedish midsummer pole. If Gustavus failed, it wasn't just his reputation on the line, but the very future of Sweden. He needed to be both a shrewd diplomat and a cunning general, a combination as rare as a unicorn with a law degree. Fortunately, his military education was not just for show. Gustavus had a knack for strategy that would soon earn him the nickname, the Lion of the North. But more on that fierce feline nickname later. As if the Kalmar War wasn't enough, Gustavus also had to deal with internal politics that were more tangled than a bowl of spaghetti. The Swedish nobility was like a herd of cats, unruly, independent, and not particularly fond of being told what to do. Managing them required a delicate balance of persuasion, diplomacy, and the occasional show of force. Gustavus had to convince them that a teenager could steer the ship of state through the stormy seas of European power politics. Gustavus's education wasn't just about book learning. It was a strategic toolkit. His grasp of military tactics was exceptional, and he had a vision for modernizing Sweden's army. He understood that wars weren't just won by brute force. They required cunning, innovation, and a dash of audacity. And let's face it, who doesn't love a good underdog story? The young king was determined to turn Sweden into a military powerhouse, and he wasn't going to let a little thing like age stand in his way. His ability to speak multiple languages was more than just a party trick. It allowed him to communicate directly with foreign dignitaries and military leaders, bypassing the usual game of diplomatic telephone that often muddled messages. This knack for clear communication would be crucial in negotiating alliances and treaties, ensuring that Sweden punched above its weight on the European stage. But let's not sugarcoat it. Gustavus's rise to power was anything but smooth. The Kalmar War dragged on, a seemingly endless chess match of sieges and skirmishes. Yet Gustavus was relentless. He was like a Nordic Energizer bunny, refusing to quit until the job was done. Under his leadership, the Swedish forces managed to hold their own, despite being outnumbered and outgunned. It was a testament to his strategic brilliance and determination. And so, the stage was set. Gustavus Adolphus, barely a man by modern standards, was crafting his legacy one battle, one negotiation, and one reform at a time. The political chaos he inherited was daunting, but he was nothing if not resourceful. Armed with a modern education and a relentless drive, he was ready to reshape Sweden's destiny. As we'll see, the Lion of the North was just getting started, and his roar would soon echo across the continent. Just as Gustavus Adolphus was getting warmed up with the Kalmar War, he was already scheming up a military makeover that would make Project Runway look like amateur hour. Now, if you think the only thing that came out of Sweden was IKEA and meatballs, think again. Gustavus was about to put Sweden on the map with a series of military innovations that would make even the grisliest generals of Europe sit up and take notice. First up, mobile artillery. Picture this. Before Gustavus, cannons were about as mobile as a grand piano in a mud pit. They were there to look intimidating, not actually move with any reasonable speed. The young king looked at these lumbering behemoths and thought, why not put these on a diet? So, he did what any forward-thinking monarch would do. He lightened the load. Gustavus turned these metal giants into nimble little beasts that could zip around the battlefield like they were on roller skates. His knack for innovation led to the development of lighter, more maneuverable cannons that could be repositioned quickly during battle. Suddenly, artillery wasn't just a stationary threat. It was a tactical game-changer. The costs of this endeavor, mind you, were nothing to sneeze at. Redesigning and producing these mobile cannons wasn't exactly like whipping up a few extra meatballs for dinner. But Gustavus was playing the long game. He knew that in warfare, the ability to adapt and respond quickly could mean the difference between victory and a very unpleasant defeat. His artillery reforms were like trading in a horse-drawn cart for a brand-new sports car. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about speed and flexibility, and boy, did it pay off. But let's not leave out the fashion statement that was Gustavus's standardized uniforms. Before he came along, soldiers were basically a motley crew of whatever they could find. Picture a battlefield where everyone looks like they just rolled out of the lost and found. Gustavus decided it was time for a wardrobe upgrade. Into the standardized uniform. It wasn't just about looking sharp. It was about fostering a sense of unity and discipline. Plus, it made it a whole lot easier to tell friend from foe in the heat of battle. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about these changes. The introduction of standardized uniforms was met with about as much enthusiasm as a mandatory Monday morning meeting. Soldiers grumbled about the new threads, but Gustavus was resolute. He understood that a cohesive appearance could boost morale and create an esprit de corps. Plus, having everyone in the same outfit made for some pretty impressive troop photos. Well, if cameras had existed back then. Now, let's add some humor into the mix. Imagine being a soldier in Gustavus's army. You've just gotten used to the idea of marching into battle, and now you're told that you'll be doing it faster and in matching outfits. The troops weren't always keen on this high-speed, high-fashion approach. Marching further and faster than ever before wasn't exactly what they signed up for. It's like being promised a leisurely stroll in the park and ending up in a marathon. But hey, Gustavus was all about efficiency. He knew that a fast-moving army was a deadly one. His soldiers were essentially the original road runners, and their ability to cover ground quickly was a huge advantage. Still, it's safe to say that not everyone appreciated the blister-inducing pace. Imagine the grumbling, the sore feet, and the longing looks at the nearest tavern as they marched past. But you know what they say, no pain, no gain. The thing is, Gustavus's reforms weren't just about winning battles. They were about changing the very fabric of warfare. His changes rippled across Europe, influencing military strategies for generations to come. The mobile artillery and standardized uniforms weren't just novelties. They were the blueprint for modern armies. He was turning the Swedish military into a finely tuned machine, and the rest of Europe couldn't help but take notes. Yet this transformation didn't happen in a vacuum. The economic realities of the time played a significant role. Sweden wasn't exactly rolling in dough, so Gustavus had to be smart about his spending. He understood that a well-equipped army was an investment in the nation's future. It was a gamble, sure, but one that Gustavus was willing to take. He was betting on Sweden's military might to secure its place on the European stage, and he had the vision and determination to make it happen. In the grand scheme of things, Gustavus Adolphus was more than just a king. He was a revolutionary. His military reforms earned him the nickname, the Lion of the North. And it wasn't just because he could roar orders like nobody's business. He was a leader who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, to push boundaries, and to drag Sweden kicking and screaming into the modern era. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good revolution story, especially when it's wrapped in a cloak of strategy, innovation, and a little bit of sartorial flair. And just when Gustavus Adolphus was about to close the curtains on his military fashion show, the 30 Years' War came knocking like an uninvited guest to a dinner party. This wasn't just any skirmish. It was the great European bar brawl of the 17th century, where religious fervor and political ambition mixed like a Molotov cocktail. Europe was a powder keg, and the spark was lit in 1618 when a couple of disgruntled Protestant nobles decided to toss some Catholic officials out a window in Prague. Apparently, defenestration was the medieval equivalent of unfriending someone on social media. Fast forward to 1630, when Gustavus decided to crash this continental conflagration in style. Sweden had been watching the chaos from the sidelines, but the rising tide of Catholic triumphs and the threat to Protestant lands made Gustavus feel like a lifeguard watching a drowning swimmer. It was time to dive in. So, he packed up his newly minted mobile artillery, gathered his uniformed troops, and set sail for Germany. His entry into the 30 Years' War was like a rock star arriving late to a concert. Everyone took notice. Gustavus wasn't just another player in this Game of Thrones. He was the game changer. Sweden's entry into the war was a bold move, like betting your last coin on a horse named Protestant Salvation. The stakes were high. Not only was Gustavus fighting for religious freedom, but he was also securing Swedish influence and territory. Talk about multitasking. Now, let's not forget the logistical nightmare that came with moving an army across Europe in the 1600. This wasn't your average road trip with a few pit stops. It was like organizing a traveling circus without Google Maps. Gustavus had to move around 20,000 soldiers, complete with artillery and supplies, across hundreds of miles of unfriendly terrain. It's like when you're relocating, but instead of a moving van, you've got ox-drawn carts, and instead of a cozy bed and breakfast, you're camping under the stars, with pestilence as your unwanted camping buddy. Yet, despite the odds, Gustavus managed to pull it off. His army was like a well-oiled machine, covering distances that would make even modern armies raise an eyebrow. In fact, they could march up to 20 miles a day, a pace that would give modern marathoners a run for their money. But this wasn't without its share of mishaps. Supplies ran low, maps were more like suggestions, and the weather was as cooperative as a cat in a bath. Still, Gustavus's hands-on approach kept things on track. He wasn't the kind of leader to sit back and relax. He was more likely to be found in the thick of things, leading charges with a flair that screamed, "Follow me if you dare." His leadership style was as direct as a cannonball. Gustavus was known for donning a simple buff coat and joining the front lines, which, while inspiring, was about as safe as juggling flaming torches. But Gustavus had a point to make. He was one with his men, a king who shared the risks and the glory. It was this fearless approach that earned him the respect of his troops, not to mention a few scars along the way. Battle of Breitenfeld in 1631 was Gustavus's piece de resistance, a masterclass in military strategy. Facing the formidable Catholic League under Count Tilly, Gustavus whipped out his tactical playbook and rewrote the rules of engagement. His use of flexible battalions and mobile artillery was like introducing Wi-Fi to a dial-up world. The Protestant forces, previously on the losing side, suddenly found themselves with a fighting chance. With Gustavus at the helm, they launched a devastating counterattack that turned the tide of the war. Breitenfeld wasn't just a victory, it was a revelation. Gustavus proved that with innovation and daring, the underdog could triumph. The battle left the Catholic League reeling and sent shockwaves through Europe. Gustavus's tactics were dissected and admired, like a piece of modern art that no one could quite understand, but everyone wanted to emulate. The victory at Breitenfeld didn't just bolster the Protestant cause. It elevated Gustavus to the status of legend, a king who could outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight his enemies. But let's not romanticize things too much. War, even with a hero like Gustavus, was brutal business. The battlefield was a grim landscape of mud, blood, and chaos. While Breitenfeld was a triumph for Gustavus, it was also a reminder of the harsh realities of war, a costly affair in both human lives and resources. Soldiers weren't just chess pieces. They were men with families, hopes, and fears, marching into the unknown for a cause that was often as murky as the battlefields they fought on. And then there's the economic side of things. War wasn't just about tactics and bravery. It was also about cold, hard cash. Gustavus's military campaigns were funded by a combination of Swedish resources and French subsidies. Yes, you heard that right. France, a Catholic power, bankrolled a Protestant king. If that sounds like a plot twist, it's because realpolitik often plays out like a soap opera, with alliances that make frenemies look like best pals. In the end, Gustavus's involvement in the 30 Years' War was about more than just battlefields and bullets. It was about redefining what it meant to be a leader, a tactician, and a king. His influence extended beyond the borders of Sweden, changing the course of European history. And while the myth of the invincible Lion of the North is a tantalizing tale, the reality is that Gustavus was a man who faced immense challenges with courage, conviction, and a touch of audacity. So, as Gustavus Adolphus continued his march through history, he left an indelible mark, a legacy of innovation, leadership, and the unyielding belief that one could change the world, even when the odds were stacked like a Jenga tower on a shaky table. Stay tuned, because this lion's roar was far from over, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue, drama, and yes, a few more historical curveballs. As the dust of Breitenfeld settled, Gustavus Adolphus found himself not just a king, but a rock star of the Protestant world. But before we get carried away with triumphant trumpets and laurel wreaths, let's remember that fame in the 17th century was a double-edged sword, much like Gustavus's own battlefield blades. His next act, the Battle of Lutzen in 1632, would immortalize him in ways he probably didn't have in mind when he strapped on his armor that fateful November morning. Now, the Battle of Lutzen wasn't exactly a walk in the Swedish countryside. It was more like a chaotic mud-wrestling match with swords and cannons, and the stakes were sky-high. Gustavus faced off against the Holy Roman Empire's forces led by Albrecht von Wallenstein, a man whose reputation was about as warm and fuzzy as a porcupine in a blizzard. Wallenstein brought his A-game, and the battlefield was set for a showdown that would be remembered down the centuries. The romantic image of Gustavus Adolphus charging valiantly into battle is one for the ages. Picture it, the Lion of the North, donned in his buff coat, riding at the head of his troops, rallying them with a roar that could rival a Norse guard. Sounds epic, right? But hold your horses, or in this case, your cavalry. The reality was a bit more, shall we say, gritty. On the morning of November 16, 1632, Lutzen was cloaked in a dense fog, the kind that makes you question if you should have just stayed in bed. Visibility was so poor that even the most advanced GPS of the day, a guy on a horse with a compass, was little help. As the battle commenced, the fog of war became all too literal. Commands were lost in the mist, formations turned to mush, and soldiers stumbled upon their enemies like party crashers at a surprise birthday. Gustavus, ever the hands-on leader, took to the field with the energy of a man half his age, which was impressive considering he was only 37. But let's not sugarcoat it. He made some risky calls. Leading a cavalry charge in that pea-soup fog was bold, but it was also about as safe as juggling chainsaws while blindfolded. Amidst the chaos, Gustavus was separated from his men, and in a tragic twist that history books have turned into legend, he was shot and killed. His death was a seismic event. Imagine the Swedish army, a well-oiled machine now missing its engine. Panic threatened to spread faster than gossip in a royal court, yet in a testament to Gustavus's leadership, his soldiers rallied. They fought with the ferocity of men who knew they were not just defending a king, but a cause. Against the odds, the Swedes carried the day, albeit at a heavy cost. Now, here's where the myth meets reality head-on. Gustavus's death became instant fodder for legend. In Sweden, his demise was spun like the greatest PR campaign of the century. The narrative of a heroic monarch sacrificing himself for the Protestant cause was too good to pass up. It was like the medieval version of a blockbuster movie, complete with a tragic hero and a glorious, if bittersweet, victory. Yet, behind the scenes, the political maneuvering was as intricate as a Baroque tapestry. Gustavus had left behind an heir, his 6-year-old daughter Christina, and a regency council that made Game of Thrones look like a tea party. The power vacuum was palpable, and everyone from Swedish nobles to foreign allies was vying for influence. The battle for Gustavus's legacy was as fierce as any military engagement. Economically, Sweden was in a delicate dance. While Gustavus's military campaigns had expanded its influence, they also drained the coffers faster than a royal banquet. War was an expensive business, and soldiers don't march for free. The financial strain added another layer of complexity to the already tumultuous post-Lutzen landscape. And yet, the image of Gustavus as the Lion of the North endured. His military reforms and battlefield innovations were studied and admired across Europe. His legacy was a blend of fact and fiction, a testament to the power of narrative in shaping history. The reality of his death, a victim of the fog and the chaos, was overshadowed by the larger-than-life story of a king who fought for faith and freedom. In the end, Gustavus's legacy is a tapestry woven from threads of truth and myth. He was a leader who dared to challenge the status quo, a king who understood the power of innovation and unity. His death at Lutzen was a turning point, both a blow and a boon for Sweden. It marked the end of an era, but it also set the stage for the next chapter in the tangled saga of the 30 Years' War. As we pause here, let's remember that history is rarely black and white. It's a spectrum of stories, shaped by those who lived them and those who tell them. Gustavus Adolphus was both a man and a myth, a king whose roar echoes across the centuries, reminding us that even in the fog of war, one can find clarity. Stay tuned. There's more to come in the next act of this historical drama. As the curtain fell on Gustavus Adolphus's life at Lutzen, the man left behind a kingdom standing at the crossroads of history, poised to leap into what would become Sweden's great power era. You see, Gustavus wasn't just a king. He was the architect of a new Sweden, ready to flex its muscles on the European stage. His reign didn't just set the stage for Sweden's coming dominance. It practically built the theater, complete with state-of-the-art lighting and sound. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to unpack how exactly this Swedish juggernaut came to be. Now, Gustavus had laid down a blueprint that would make any modern urban planner swoon. Under his rule, Sweden went from being a bit player to a major contender in the European power game. And it wasn't just about conquering territories. It was about transforming Sweden into a well-oiled machine of governance, trade, and military might. Picture this. Gustavus's administrative reforms were the scaffolding on which Sweden's burgeoning empire was built. He streamlined government, boosting efficiency like a 17th-century Elon Musk on a mission to Mars. The Swedish bureaucracy evolved into a model of modernity, with a centralized approach that allowed for rapid decision-making and resource allocation. And let's talk economic savvy. Gustavus understood that a strong economy was the backbone of any great power. Sweden's resources were marshaled with the precision of a maestro conducting an orchestra. Iron production, crucial for his military machine, was ramped up, with the Borgslagen region becoming the Iron Man of Europe, producing over 3,000 tons of iron annually by the 1630. This wasn't just a bump in production. It was an industrial revolution in miniature, long before steam engines started puffing away. But here's where it gets spicy. Gustavus's military innovations didn't just revolutionize Sweden, they rewrote the rulebook for warfare across the continent. His legacy in military tactics was like a viral tick-tock dance. Everyone wanted in. The mobile artillery, flexible battalions, and standardized uniforms weren't just novelties. They became staples in European armies, much like powdered wigs and questionable hygiene. Generals from France to Prussia took notes faster than students before finals, integrating Gustavus's tactics into their own arsenals. His methods influenced military strategy for centuries, making the Lion of the North a posthumous instructor at every military academy worth its salt. Now, let's have a little fun with a speculative twist. Imagine Gustavus strolling through modern-day Sweden, a land as neutral as a monk at a Mardi Gras parade. How might our battle-hardened lion react to this serene Scandinavian oasis, where the only battles are over who gets the last cannibal? One can only imagine his bewilderment at Sweden's pacifist stance, perhaps muttering, "I leave you a legacy of military might, and you trade it for IKEA and ABBA." But let's not be too hard on modern Sweden. The country's neutrality has been a strategic choice, allowing it to avoid the ravages of 2 world wars while emerging as a global leader in diplomacy, innovation, and, yes, flat-pack furniture. Gustavus might raise an eyebrow, but would likely appreciate the pragmatic twist. recognizing a different kind of power in Sweden's ability to influence through peace rather than conflict. And speaking of influence, let's circle back to Gustavus's myth. It's tempting to imagine him as a flawless hero, a Nordic demigod bestriding the annals of history. But let's ground ourselves in reality. Yes, he was a visionary, a leader who revolutionized military strategy and governance. But he was also a man who made mistakes, took risks, and faced the limits of human mortality. His story is as much about the man as the myth, a reminder that history's greatest figures are often a blend of both. As we wrap this saga, it's clear that Gustavus Adolphus left a legacy more enduring than any monument. He was a king who dared to dream bigger than the confines of his kingdom, who turned Sweden from a snowy backwater into a European powerhouse. His impact was undeniably lion-sized, roaring through the ages as a testament to the power of vision, innovation, and sheer Nordic grit. So, next time you assemble a Billy bookcase, remember Gustavus Adolphus, a king who built a legacy as enduring as Swedish craftsmanship and as influential as a catchy pop song. In the dawn of the 19th century, when even the sun seemed reluctant to shine on the Maryland fields, a child named Araminta Ross, known as Minty, entered a harsh world in 1822. Born into slavery, her early years were less about frolicking through meadows and more about surviving a brutal system that treated her as property. If you think your first job was tough, consider Minty's role as a human alarm clerk, a gig without benefits, unless you count the privilege of not being whipped as one. Minty's early life was a symphony of absurd tasks assigned by her enslavers. At the tender age of 5, she was hired out to watch over a baby. But here's the kicker. No one cared if she was a child herself. The baby cried, and Minty got whipped. This wasn't a babysitting gig with snacks and TV breaks. It was more like a survival game with crying penalties. By the age of 7, she was already a seasoned worker, sent to check muskrat traps in freezing waters. Talk about a childhood filled with character-building experiences, or as we might call them today, child labor violations. Navigating the treacherous waters of slavery, Minty couldn't help but notice the glaring contradictions of the world around her. Freedom was a word that floated through hushed conversations, a distant dream for many. Yet Minty was not one to just dream. She had visions that went deeper. These visions, however, were more than just metaphorical. Enter the infamous head injury, the plot twist that no one saw coming. Around the age of 12, Minty found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time, a general theme of her life, it seems. She was sent to a store where she encountered a runaway slave. The overseer, in a fit of anger, hurled a 2-pound iron weight at the slave, but hit Minty instead. You could say Minty got the worst end of the stick, or in this case, the weight. The injury cracked her skull, leaving her with lifelong headaches, narcoleptic episodes, and most notably, vivid visions. Now, in any superhero origin story, this is where the protagonist discovers their powers. And while it might sound like we're verging into comic book territory, Minty's visions became a guiding force in her life. Some might call them divine intervention, others a neurological condition, but whatever the case, they gave her an unshakable sense of purpose. She began to see herself as someone destined for something greater than the confines of her life. By 1844, Minty, now a young woman, married a free black man named John Tubman. It was a bold move, considering the absurdity of marrying into freedom while still being enslaved. The marriage was like a cruel joke. Minty was still bound by the chains of slavery, despite her husband's free status. But she took his last name, becoming Harriet Tubman, a name that would soon echo through the pages of history. Harriet's transition from being a slave to a freedom seeker wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the culmination of years of witnessing and experiencing the brutality of slavery. Tipping point came in 1849 when she heard rumors that her owner, Edward Brodes, might sell her. The idea of being sold down south, where conditions were even worse, was a fate she couldn't accept. It was time for action. Harriet decided that if she was going to be sold, she'd sell herself to freedom. With her 2 brothers, Ben and Henry, Harriet made her first escape attempt. It was September 17, 1849, a date marked by equal parts terror and hope. Their journey had barely begun when her brothers, gripped by fear, decided to turn back. Harriet, however, was nothing if not determined. She pressed on alone, guided by the North Star, a celestial GPS for freedom seekers. The path to freedom was fraught with dangers that could make any horror movie seem like a walk in the park. Slave catchers, treacherous terrain, and the constant threat of betrayal were just a few of the obstacles. But Harriet had something more potent than fear, an unyielding belief in her right to freedom. After a grueling journey of nearly 90 miles, she crossed into Pennsylvania. It was there she tasted the sweetness of freedom, a moment she famously described by saying, "I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now that I was free." There was such a glory over everything. Harriet's early life was a bizarre blend of the grotesque and the extraordinary, a testament to her resilience and wit. While the myths surrounding her might paint her as a larger-than-life figure, the reality was that she was a woman who made choices that defied the logic of her time. She wasn't just a character in a historical drama. She was the director, rewriting her own script in a world that offered little in the way of happy endings. As we delve deeper into Harriet's story, it's crucial to remember that her journey was not just a personal quest, but a pivotal chapter in the larger narrative of American history. Her life was a stark reminder of the inhumanity of slavery and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to fight against it. Harriet Tubman was more than just a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She was a beacon of hope in a world desperately in need of one. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Freedom was just the beginning of Harriet Tubman's epic saga. You could say she was just warming up. Once she crossed into Pennsylvania, she became a living testament to the idea that freedom isn't just a destination. It's a journey, and Harriet was about to become its most famous travel agent. Now, let's talk logistics, because the Underground Railroad was less about choo-choo trains and more about human grit and clever networking. Despite its romantic name, the Underground Railroad had about as many tracks as a board game. It was a series of safe houses, secret routes, and daring escapades. And Harriet, she was the conductor with a knack for not sticking to the script. Harriet's solo trek to Philadelphia was roughly 90 miles, a distance that sounds like a long Sunday drive today, but back then, it was more like a game of survival. Imagine trying to cover that ground without the luxury of Google Maps, relying instead on the North Star and the kindness of strangers. She traveled mostly by night, a cloak of darkness her only ally. The journey was no cakewalk. It was a test of endurance, stealth, and sheer willpower. Let's bust another myth while we're at it. Harriet wasn't some lone ranger. The Underground Railroad was a collaborative effort involving free blacks, Quakers, and abolitionists who risked their own safety for the cause. But make no mistake, Harriet was the MVP, or as they say in gaming circles, the one who carried the team. She didn't just make the journey for herself. She turned around and made it again and again, at least 13 more times, rescuing around 70 enslaved people. Now here's the economic reality. Escaping slavery wasn't just a moral decision, it was an economic gamble. Harriet knew that if caught, the cost wouldn't just be her freedom, it could be her life. Slave catchers were a constant threat, armed with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which was basically a bounty hunter's dream come true. It allowed them to capture escaped slaves anywhere in the U.S. and return them to their so-called owners. Harriet had a $40,000 bounty on her head, a sum that would make today's cash-strapped college graduates weep. Let's put that into perspective. 40 grand in the 1850 was akin to a small fortune, enough to buy a sizable estate or a whole lot of livestock. This bounty was a testament to her effectiveness and the threat she posed to the slave-owning establishment. Yet, despite the risks, Harriet continued her missions, armed with nothing more than her wits, a revolver, and a deep-seated conviction that freedom was worth fighting for. Speaking of resourcefulness, Harriet's strategies were as sharp as her resolve. She used coded songs to communicate her plans, like a 1800s DJ with a penchant for freedom-themed tracks. Go Down, Moses, and Wade in the Water were more than spirituals. They were Harriet's version of encrypted messages, signaling when it was safe to move or when to lay low. Economically speaking, the stakes were sky-high. The Southern economy was deeply entrenched in the institution of slavery, with an estimated 4 million enslaved people by 1860, valued at about $3 billion, a staggering sum at the time. To say that Harriet was up against a colossal machine is an understatement. She was challenging an entire economic system with a knife to a gunfight. But let's not gloss over the social factors. The North wasn't exactly a paradise of equality. Sure, it was free soil, but racism still hung in the air like a bad smell. Harriet settled in Philadelphia, a city that was more welcoming than most, yet still fraught with its own challenges. The city was a hub for abolitionist activity, but even there, free blacks faced discrimination and limited opportunities. Harriet found work as a domestic servant, a far cry from the heroic figure we envision, but she knew that every dollar she earned was another step toward freedom for others. Her time in Philadelphia wasn't just about earning a living. It was about building connections. She linked up with key figures like William Still, a prominent abolitionist and conductor on the Underground Railroad. Together, they orchestrated daring rescues, often with Harriet leading the charge. Still's meticulous records of their activities would become crucial historical documents, capturing the essence of their audacious missions. And let's not forget Harriet's knack for psychological warfare. She was a master of disguise, often posing as an old woman or a man to avoid detection. Her escapades were the stuff of legend. One time, she even faked reading a book to throw off suspicious passengers on a train, despite being illiterate. Talk about flipping the script. As for the larger political picture, Harriet's actions were a direct challenge to the fugitive slave law, a piece of legislation that was about as popular among abolitionists as a tax audit. Her defiance was a beacon of hope for enslaved people and a thorn in the side of slaveholders. Each successful mission was a thumb in the eye of a society that saw human beings as property. It's tempting to romanticize Harriet's story as that of a fearless freedom fighter, and she was indeed that, but she was also a strategist, a leader, and a woman of immense courage who faced unbearable odds. Her story wasn't just about escaping slavery, it was about dismantling it, one life at a time. As we wrap up this chapter of her incredible journey, it's clear that Harriet Tubman wasn't just a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She was the driving force behind a movement that transcended her own time. Her life was a testament to the power of individual action in the face of systemic oppression, a story we'll continue to unravel as we delve deeper into her legacy. So stay tuned, because Harriet's journey is far from over, and the best is yet to come. So, where were we? Ah yes, Harriet Tubman was more than just a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She was the underground movement's unsung dynamo, an icon before hashtags were a thing. But let's dive into the nuts and bolts, or should I say, the twists and turns, of her life as Moses, the liberator of her people. You see, Harriet wasn't just leading folks to freedom. She was orchestrating one of history's most daring series of jailbreaks. And she did it with style more fitting for a spy thriller than a history textbook. Let's talk numbers first. Harriet made 13 documented trips, rescuing around 70 enslaved people. Now, that's not just a heroic statistic. It's a logistical marvel. Think about it. No cell phones, no GPS, just sheer grit and a map of safe houses tucked into her mental Rolodex. She was like the ultimate travel agent for the freedom-seeking crowd, except she didn't book round trips. One-way tickets only, please. But why Moses, you ask? Well, unlike the biblical figure who parted the Red Sea, Harriet didn't need divine intervention to lead her people to freedom, just an unyielding determination and a revolver for good measure. The nickname wasn't just a nod to her leadership. It was an acknowledgement of her ability to guide people to the promised land, or in this case, the free states of the North. It was a name whispered in awe through the grapevine of the enslaved, a symbol of hope wrapped in a legend. Now, it wasn't all cloak and dagger. Harriet's missions had real-world risks that would make any insurance agent break into a sweat. With the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 hot on her heels, Harriet had to outsmart bounty hunters who were more persistent than a telemarketer at dinner time. The law made the North just as dangerous as the South, turning it into a minefield of potential capture. And yet, she navigated these waters with the precision of a seasoned sailor, never losing a single passenger on her route. Speaking of economics, let's crunch some numbers. The $40,000 bounty on Harriet's head was the equivalent of nearly $1 million today. That's right. Harriet was basically a walking lottery ticket for slave catchers. Yet, despite this king's ransom, her strategies were as cool as the other side of the pillow. Her modus operandi included traveling on Saturdays because runaway notices wouldn't appear in newspapers until Monday. Clever, huh? And when she wasn't slipping past bounty hunters, she was busy recruiting allies. Enter William Still, a major player in the Underground Railroad saga. A free black man and an abolitionist, Still was a logistics maestro whose records of escapees are now invaluable historical documents. He was essentially the Underground Railroad's chief data officer, and Harriet was his staff field operative. Together, they formed a formidable team, turning Philadelphia into a nerve center for abolitionist activity. Still's detailed accounts of Harriet's missions are the reason we know so much about her extraordinary life. But let's not forget the human element. Harriet wasn't just a fearless leader, she was also a savvy psychologist. She used a mix of persuasion and determination to keep morale high. Her revolver wasn't just for slave catchers. It was also a reminder to her charges that turning back wasn't an option. Harriet famously said, "You'll be free or die," a stark ultimatum that left no room for hesitation. And here's where we bust another myth. Harriet's missions weren't just about heroics. They were also about community. She was part of a clandestine network that included free blacks, Quakers, and other abolitionists who risked everything for the cause. These weren't just people with good intentions. They were accomplices in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Each rescue was a testament to the power of collective action, a reminder that change often starts with a group of determined individuals refusing to accept the status quo. Yet, amid all this, Harriet's story is a stark reminder that freedom wasn't a panacea. The North may have been free soil, but it was no utopia. Discrimination was as pervasive as the morning fog, a constant reminder that true freedom was still a distant dream. Harriet's life in Philadelphia wasn't just about orchestrating rescues. It was also about navigating a society that, while free, was far from equal. Her role in the Underground Railroad was a balancing act of hope and reality, a testament to her resilience and adaptability. She was a leader who didn't just talk about freedom. She embodied it, turning the idea into action, one life at a time. Harriet Tubman wasn't just a conductor. She was a force of nature, a woman whose legacy transcends the romanticized narratives to reveal a story of courage, strategy, and unyielding resolve. As we continue to unravel her story, it's clear that Harriet's journey is far from over. She was more than just a liberator. She was an architect of change, laying the groundwork for a future that would one day see the end of slavery. But that's a tale for another day, so stay tuned. Harriet's story is one you'll want to see all the way through to the end. So, with Harriet Tubman already a legend in the making, let's shift gears and see how she swapped her conductor's hat for a Union bonnet during the Civil War. If you thought her Underground Railroad days were action-packed, wait until you hear about her war escapades. Harriet channeled her inner James Bond, but with fewer martinis and more life-or-death stakes. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Harriet didn't sit around knitting socks for the troops. No, she jumped right into the fray, transforming from a liberator on the rails to a Union spy and nurse. Over the next few years, she worked closely with Union forces, using her knowledge of Southern terrain and her knack for covert operations to gather intelligence. She was basically the CIA before the CIA was cool, and she did it all while helping to heal the wounded soldiers who fought for freedom. Her first gig was in the coastal regions of South Carolina, where she served as a cook and nurse for the Union Army. Glamorous, not exactly, but Harriet wasn't one to shy away from the gritty details of war. She knew that tending to the sick and wounded was just as crucial as gathering intel. And let's face it, if Harriet Tubman is handing you a bowl of soup, you know there's more than just broth in that pot. There's a side of rebellion. But Harriet's most audacious wartime feat happened on June 2, 1863. It was the Combahee River Raid, a mission so daring it sounds like something straight out of an action movie. Picture Harriet leading a group of 150 black Union soldiers as they navigated the treacherous waters of the South Carolina River. Their goal, to destroy Confederate supply lines and free the enslaved people working the plantations along the riverbanks. The result was nothing short of spectacular. Over 700 slaves were liberated in a single night. Imagine the scene. Harriet, standing tall on the deck of a Union gunboat, orchestrating a raid that not only crippled the Confederate economy, but also delivered a significant morale boost to the Union. It was the first time in American history that a woman led an armed assault, and Harriet did it with the precision of a seasoned general. Her strategic genius in planning the raid was nothing short of legendary. The Union Army's official report on the operation credited her with providing key intelligence that ensured its success. You could say Harriet Tubman wasn't just a conductor. She was the maestro of liberation. But let's talk economics, because this raid wasn't just about freeing people. It was about undermining the Confederate war effort. By seizing rice plantations and disrupting supply lines, Harriet and her team dealt a blow to the Southern economy, which was already reeling from the Union blockade. If the South was a leaking ship, Harriet was the iceberg that made sure it sank a little faster. Now, here's the kicker. Despite her invaluable contributions, Harriet didn't receive a pension from the U.S. government until decades later. This was a woman who had risked life and limb for the Union cause, yet she was shunned by the very nation she helped to save. Talk about a slap in the face. It wasn't until 1899, a full 34 years after the Civil War ended, that she was granted a pension as a nurse, and even then, it was a measly sum compared to what male veterans received. The irony here is thicker than a Southern accent. Harriet Tubman, who had done more for the Union than many of her male counterparts, was left to scrape by in her later years. She even had to sell her own baked goods to make ends meet. The government's reluctance to recognize her service was a glaring example of the systemic discrimination that women and African Americans faced, even after the war had supposedly leveled the playing field. Despite this injustice, Harriet remained undeterred. She continued to fight for what she believed in, turning her home in Auburn, New York, into a haven for the elderly and needy. Harriet's life was a testament to the power of resilience in the face of adversity. She was a woman who never stopped fighting, whether on the battlefield or in her own backyard. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Harriet's wartime exploits, remember that her legacy is more than just a series of daring rescues and military maneuvers. Harriet Tubman was a woman who defied the social and economic constraints of her time, carving out a place in history that went far beyond the Underground Railroad. Her story is a reminder that heroism doesn't always come with medals or accolades. Sometimes, it's just about doing what needs to be done, no matter the cost. And while we're not quite done with Harriet's story, because trust me, there's more to come, let's take a moment to appreciate the audacity of a woman who didn't just change the course of history. She redefined what it meant to be a hero in a world that wasn't ready for one. Stay tuned, because Harriet Tubman's journey is far from over, and the best is yet to come. So, as we dive into the sunset chapter of Harriet Tubman's story, let's not forget that the spotlight doesn't dim just because the war drums have quieted. If you think Harriet's life slowed down post-Civil War, think again. This was a woman who saw a challenge and thought, why not tackle it head-on? Her post-war years were anything but a quiet retirement. Instead, Harriet swapped her Union blues for a new role as a fierce advocate for women's suffrage and civil rights, proving that the fight for justice didn't end on the battlefield. It merely changed arenas. Harriet settled in Auburn, New York, a place that became her sanctuary and a hub for her continued activism. She purchased a modest home there in 1859 with the help of abolitionist Senator William H. Seward. Yes, the same Seward who almost got axed along with Lincoln in that infamous assassination conspiracy. Auburn was more than just a postal address. It was a community where Harriet continued her mission to uplift and support others. She transformed her home into a refuge for the elderly and those in need, a precursor to what we'd call a social services center today. She wasn't just a homeowner. She was a community architect, crafting a space that echoed with the spirit of compassion and resilience. Now, let's talk money because, surprisingly, even heroes have bills to pay. Harriet's economic situation, post-war, was a tightrope walk over a financial pit. Despite her invaluable contributions during the war, she had to fight tooth and nail for a pension. The U.S. government was about as generous as a Scrooge on a budget, only granting her a nurse's pension in 1899, decades after her gallant service. This paltry pension was a mere $20 a month, barely enough to cover basic needs, let alone the expenses of running a refuge. It's an economic reality that underscores the systemic inequalities of the time, where gratitude was often expressed in heartwarming speeches rather than cold, hard cash. Yet, financial strain didn't deter Harriet from pushing forward. She was a key figure in the suffrage movement, rubbing elbows with the likes of Susan B., Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Harriet spoke at suffrage meetings, offering a unique perspective that highlighted the intersectionality of race and gender. She knew firsthand that the fight for women's rights couldn't be isolated from the broader struggle for racial equality. Harriet wasn't just advocating for a seat at the table. She was demanding a whole new seating arrangement. Her speeches were less about rhetoric and more about reality. Harriet didn't mince words or sugarcoat the harsh truths of inequality. She was the embodiment of the suffrage movement's backbone, a living testament to the belief that liberty and justice were not just lofty ideals, but tangible rights worth fighting for. You could say that Harriet was the ultimate multitasker, balancing her activism with the day-to-day management of her home, which she had expanded into the Harriet Tubman home for the aged by 1908. This was no ordinary retirement home. It was a sanctuary of hope, a place where the elderly and needy could find solace and support. But as Harriet's legacy grew, so too did the myths surrounding her life. Hollywood and popular culture have a knack for painting Harriet as a one-dimensional hero, a kind of historical action figure whose heroic deeds fit neatly into a 2-hour runtime. The reality, however, is far more complex. Harriet wasn't just the fearless conductor of the Underground Railroad. She was a visionary leader, a community builder, and a relentless advocate for justice. Her story is often romanticized to the point where the gritty details, the late nights, the strategic maneuvers, the constant threat of capture are lost in translation. Movies love an underdog, but they often gloss over the economic and social realities that shaped Harriet's life. The truth is, Harriet's journey wasn't just a tale of courage. It was also a story of relentless perseverance against a backdrop of systemic oppression. She wasn't a superhero with a cape. She was a real woman with real struggles, fighting against a system rigged to keep people like her down. The allure of her legend sometimes overshadows the harsh realities she faced daily. So, why does Hollywood prefer the sanitized version? Perhaps it's because the true story of Harriet Tubman challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about our past and present. It forces us to acknowledge that systemic injustice isn't just a relic of history, but a persistent issue that echoes into today. Harriet's life wasn't a neat narrative with a happy Hollywood ending. It was a messy, complicated, and inspiring testament to human resilience. In wrapping up Harriet's incredible journey, it's clear that her legacy is more than just a footnote in history books. She was a trailblazer whose impact reverberates through time, a woman who defied the odds to carve out a space for herself and others in a world that wasn't ready for her audacity. Harriet Tubman's story is a reminder that history's true heroes are often those who work tirelessly in the shadows, their efforts unseen and uncelebrated, yet infinitely powerful. As we close this chapter on Harriet Tubman, let's remember that her legacy isn't just about the past. It's a call to action for the future. Her life teaches us that the fight for justice and equality is a marathon, not a sprint, and that real change requires both courage and commitment. Harriet didn't just dream of a better world. She rolled up her sleeves and built it, brick by brick, life by life. Her story isn't just history. It's a blueprint for how to fight for a better tomorrow. And that, dear friends, is a lesson worth holding on to. You find yourself in the heart of 15th century Florence, where the streets are alive with the clatter of carts on cobblestones and the whisper of silk gowns brushing past. The air is tinged with the tantalizing aroma of fresh bread mingling with the less than savory scent of the Arno River. But we're not here for the perfume. Our destination is the Renaissance Workshop. It's a hive of activity and ambition, a place where sawdust dances in the sunlight streaming through small leaded windows, and the smell of fresh paint is almost intoxicating. Here, artisans toil away, creating the masterpieces that, centuries later, will have people queuing up at museums trying to look cultured. As an apprentice in this bustling world, you're more like a human Swiss Army knife than a budding artist. Your day kicks off as the first rays of sunlight creep over the city, and you're up to your elbows in tasks that range from the mundane to the downright grueling. If you thought modern unpaid internships were rough, well, they've got nothing on this medieval grind. Your hands will be stained with paint, your back sore from bending over a workbench, and your clothes perpetually dusted with plaster. But hey, it's all for the glory of learning, right? Florence, during the Renaissance, is not just a city, it's the epicenter of a cultural earthquake. Imagine the energy of New York in the 1980s, but swap Wall Street for the Medici and replace disco with Da Vinci. You're living in a time when art is not just decoration, it's big business. The power players of the day, wealthy patrons like Lorenzo de Medici, are the venture capitalists of creativity, funding artists and artisans to immortalize them in fresco and marble. In this high-stakes game, even the raw materials are worth their weight in gold, or rather, ultramarine. Speaking of ultramarine, let's talk about what makes this deep blue pigment so special. It's made from lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone imported all the way from what is now Afghanistan. Transporting this vibrant blue across continents is no small feat, and it makes ultramarine more expensive than gold. In fact, by the early 15th century, a single pound of ultramarine could set you back about 30 florins, the equivalent of a year's wages for a skilled laborer. Yet here you are, entrusted with grinding it into the finest powder to be mixed with egg yolk or oil. Talk about pressure. But it's not just about the paint. Gilded frames are all the rage in this period, because nothing says, "I'm important," like a painting encased in a shiny gold border. The obsession with gold leaf is as much about status as it is about aesthetics. You see, a frame isn't just for holding a painting. It's an extension of the artwork itself, a testament to the patron's wealth and taste. So, while you might spend hours painstakingly laying gold leaf over a wooden frame, remember, you're really crafting a halo for your benefactor's ego. Now, let's debunk a romantic notion. The idea that these apprenticeships were all about nurturing young talent. Sure, there's learning involved, but don't kid yourself. It's also about cheap labor. You're not just learning to paint. You're sweeping floors, mixing pigments, and doing the grunt work that no one else wants to do. The Renaissance workshop is a meritocracy of muscle, sweat, and maybe a bit of nepotism if you played your cards right. The economic realities of Florence drive this system. Artisans need hands to get the work done, and you need a place to learn the trade, even if it means you're essentially the workshop's go-to-gopher. Yet, despite the back-breaking labor and the humble beginnings, there's a reason why young apprentices flock to these workshops. It's not just about the faint hope of one day becoming a master. It's the allure of being part of something greater, something that defies time. Every brushstroke, every chisel mark is a step into the annals of history, a chance to contribute to the cultural legacy of the Renaissance. While you're grinding pigments or polishing a piece of marble, remember that you're also brushing shoulders with greatness. Michelangelo didn't just pop out of the womb sculpting Pieta, after all. Of course, navigating the intricacies of a Renaissance workshop isn't just about dealing with materials and egos. It's about understanding the delicate dance of supply and demand that governs Florence's thriving economy. With its bustling markets and trade routes, Florence is a city that thrives on commerce. Whether it's textiles, banking, or art, everything is interconnected. The price of wool can affect the cost of a fresco, and a new trade agreement can mean a sudden influx of exotic pigments. It's a tangled web, and as an apprentice, you learn to navigate it with the same precision you'll one day bring to your art. In this world, patrons are both your benefactors and your biggest critics. They hold the purse strings and the power to elevate your work, or consign it to obscurity. A well-placed commission can launch a career, while a displeased patron can bury it. As you labor away in the workshop, you're always acutely aware that perfection isn't just a goal, it's a necessity. Every piece you work on is a potential ticket to recognition or oblivion. As the sun sets over Florence, casting long shadows across the city, you pause to take it all in. The workshop is quieter now, the frenetic energy of the day giving way to a more contemplative calm. The smell of paint still lingers in the air, mingling with the earthy scent of sawdust and the faint tang of metal. This is your world, a place where art and commerce collide, where the past is constantly being reborn in wood, stone, and pigment. And as you lay your tools down for the day, ready to rest your weary hands, you remember that you're not just an apprentice. You're part of a legacy that will endure long after the last brushstroke has dried. And so, as you lay down those tired tools, still humming with the rhythm of the day, let's take a moment to zoom in on the pecking order that runs this Renaissance workshop like a well-oiled, albeit paint-splattered, machine. At the top of this artistic food chain is the master. Think of him as the CEO of Craftsmanship, Inc., a figure who holds the reins of the operation with the kind of authority that would make any modern middle manager envious. But don't let the title fool you into imagining a kindly mentor. No, the master is more likely to be a shrewd businessman than a gentle teacher. His job, to ensure the workshop churns out masterpieces that keep the coffers full and the patrons happy. Now, before you start picturing the master as some kind of Renaissance Yoda, let's debunk that romantic notion. Sure, he might occasionally dispense pearls of wisdom between sips of Chianti, but more often than not, he's cracking the whip to ensure deadlines are met and standards are upheld. After all, a single misstep could have a wealthy patron fuming faster than you can say, Florentine Florin. In this high-stakes world, the master isn't just your boss. He's also your ticket to a future career, or the reason you might end up flipping pizzas instead of painting faces. Beneath the master, you'll find the journeymen, a merry band of skilled artisans who are no strangers to ambition. These guys are the middle management of the workshop, carrying the weight of production on their weary shoulders, while dreaming of the day they can hang their own shingle and boss around apprentices of their own. But don't be fooled into thinking journeymen are living the artistic dream. They're more likely juggling the dual pressures of perfecting their craft and playing the political chess game required to inch closer to the coveted master status. It's a bit like being stuck in career purgatory. You're skilled enough to be indispensable, but not quite powerful enough to call the shots. And let's not forget the guilds, those shadowy overlords of the artisan world. These organizations are like the Renaissance version of LinkedIn, only with more secret handshakes and fewer inspirational memes. Joining a guild is mandatory if you want to work as a craftsman, but it's not as easy as clicking join now. First, you've got to pay the membership fee, which isn't pocket change. It could cost you up to 50 florins, enough to fund a modest wedding or buy a decent mule. That's right, your ticket to professional legitimacy is the equivalent of a small down payment on a house. Once you're in, though, the guild has your back, sort of. They set the rules, dictate the prices, and even settle disputes. However, access to these perks requires more than just cash. You need a solid reference, too. A glowing endorsement from a respected master can open doors faster than a golden key, while the lack of one can leave you knocking in vain. It's a bit like needing a 5-star Yelp review before you've even served your first customer. So, why endure this labyrinthine system? Because the guilds offer stability in an otherwise cutthroat market. They're the gatekeepers of quality, ensuring that every piece of art meets a certain standard. In a world where reputation is everything, being guild-approved is like having a Michelin star on your workshop door. But let's talk workshop politics, those delightful games of power and influence. The romanticized image of a benevolent master nurturing talent like a Renaissance Bob Ross is often just that, a fantasy. In reality, favoritism is as rampant as the plague. If you're lucky enough to catch the master's eye, you might find yourself nudged up the ladder. Conversely, one misstep or misplaced word could see you relegated to the workshop's dingy corners, forever mixing pigments while others bask in the limelight. These dynamics create an environment where alliances are forged and broken with the frequency of a soap opera plot twist. Journeymen vie for the master's favor, while apprentices try to curry favor with anyone who might offer a leg up. It's a delicate dance, one that requires as much skill in diplomacy as in art. And while it may sound like a Machiavellian nightmare, the truth is that these politics are just another brushstroke in the complex canvas of Renaissance life. They remind us that, beneath the gilded frames and vibrant frescoes, the human condition remains as messy and colorful as the paint on those workshop floors. As the evening deepens, you might ponder the paradox of this world, a place where the quest for beauty often masks the less than picturesque realities of ambition and survival. Yet, it's precisely this blend of romance and reality that makes the Renaissance workshop so compelling. Each day is a new chapter in a story that stretches beyond the confines of walls and wages, a tale of artistry and ambition that echoes through the ages. So, as you close up shop for the night, take heart in the knowledge that, regardless of where you stand in the hierarchy, you're part of a narrative far grander than any one masterpiece. As you close up shop for the night, you find yourself ruminating on the paradoxical nature of this world, where the pursuit of beauty often masks the grittier realities of ambition and survival. Yet, it's precisely this blend of romance and reality that makes the Renaissance workshop so compelling. Each day is a new chapter in a story that stretches beyond the confines of walls and wages, a tale of artistry and ambition that echoes through the ages. So, as you contemplate the narrative you're a part of, let's dive deeper into the nuts and bolts, or more accurately, the brushes and chisels, that define this artistic era. Let's start with those canvases. You know, the ones that modern art students buy pre-stretched and primed, wrapped in plastic like grocery store chicken. In the Renaissance, preparing a canvas was a labor-intensive art form in itself. It all begins with a simple wooden frame, which you'd wrap in linen or hemp before slathering on multiple layers of gesso, a mixture of chalk, white pigment, and glue. Each layer needed to dry before the next was applied, and you had to sand them down to a glass-like finish. This was no quick task. It could take weeks to get a surface smooth enough to satisfy a discerning master. Talk about delayed gratification. Once the canvas was ready, the real artistry began, layering pigments to create those vibrant scenes that now fill galleries worldwide. But don't be fooled by the romantic notion of the lone genius, brush in hand, conjuring masterpieces from thin air. The reality was more like an assembly line, with apprentices preparing paints by grinding minerals and mixing them with oil or egg yolk. This wasn't just art, it was chemistry. And while Leonardo da Vinci might have had a head full of ideas, he wasn't above drafting a few apprentices to do the grunt work. In fact, without their back-breaking labor, many masterpieces would likely remain figments of imagination. Speaking of pigments, let's talk about their complex chemistry. Forget the digital color palette. In the Renaissance, each hue had its own backstory. Take, for instance, the vibrant red known as vermilion. Derived from cinnabar, a mercury sulfide mineral, this intoxicating shade could be as hazardous as it was eye-catching. Prolonged exposure sometimes led to mercury poisoning. And yet, it was a popular choice for depicting the rich robes of cardinals or the flushed cheeks of cherubs. Nothing like a little danger to make art truly thrilling. On the other end of the spectrum, ultramarine was the blue of choice for those who could afford it. But let's bust the myth right here. It wasn't just about aesthetics. Using ultramarine was a status symbol, akin to driving a luxury car today. The deeper the blue, the deeper the patron's pockets. And who held the purse strings on such extravagant commissions? Enter the Medici, the banking dynasty that transformed Florence into a cultural epicenter. Their influence was so pervasive that their approval or disapproval could turn the tide of an artist's career faster than you can say Michelangelo. The Medici didn't just fund art, they dictated it. Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, and not entirely without reason, was more than just a fan of the arts. He was a cultural power broker, deciding not only what got painted, but also where it would hang. If he wanted a fresco in the family chapel, you bet it would be a spectacle to outshine any rival's commission. It was less about personal taste and more about political chess. Each piece of art was a move on the board, reflecting the Medici's dominance and their not-so-subtle reminder of who really ran Florence. Commissions weren't doled out willy-nilly, either. The process often involved intricate negotiations and contracts as detailed as a modern-day mortgage agreement. These documents specified everything from the subject matter and dimensions to the type of materials used. And woe betide the artist who failed to meet the expectations outlined within. If a patron felt shortchanged, the repercussions could be as dire as finding yourself blacklisted from future commissions. But let's not forget the economic ripple effect of these commissions. Think of it as the Renaissance version of a Kickstarter campaign. When a major project got the green light, it wasn't just the artist who benefited. Woodworkers, metalsmiths, and even local tavern owners saw an uptick in business. The creation of a single altarpiece could sustain an entire ecosystem of craftspeople and merchants. It was a vivid reminder that art wasn't just a solitary pursuit. It was a communal endeavor, with each brushstroke and chisel mark contributing to the broader tapestry of Florentine society. And then there was the small matter of artistic inspiration. While some might picture artists waiting for a muse to descend from the heavens, the reality was often more pragmatic. Sketchbooks were filled not with divine visions, but with studies of everyday life, anatomical sketches, and even doodles of the family cat. The genius of the Renaissance lay not in divine inspiration, but in observation and innovation. Artists were the original hackers, constantly experimenting and borrowing ideas to create something new. They didn't just think outside the box, they reinvented the box entirely. As the night deepens and Florence settles into a quieter rhythm, you're left reflecting on the layers of complexity that define this era. The Renaissance workshop is a microcosm of society, where art and economics dance a delicate minuet. Each creation is both a personal expression and a public statement, a testament to the power of human creativity and the relentless drive for recognition and legacy. And while the myth of the solitary genius endures, the reality is a tapestry woven from the threads of collaboration, commerce, and sheer determination. So, as you rest your weary hands and close your eyes, remember that each day in this workshop is a brushstroke on the canvas of history. Whether you're mixing pigments or sanding canvases, you're contributing to a legacy that transcends time. And as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll dream not of fame or fortune, but of the simple satisfaction of having played your part in the grand narrative of the Renaissance. So, as you drift into dreams of pigment-laden glory, let's dive back into the bustling heart of the Renaissance workshop, where the air is thick with ambition, and the social dynamics are as intricate as a Florentine tapestry. In this world, gender roles are as rigid as a well-starched ruff, but that doesn't mean women are entirely absent from the scene. Far from it. Let's set the record straight. While the Renaissance workshop was predominantly a male domain, women did play roles that were both limited and significant. Sure, the history books highlight the Da Vincis and Michelangelos, but behind some of those masterpieces, you'd find women quietly contributing, often in the shadows. Women were typically relegated to roles that society deemed appropriate. Think textile work, embroidery, and even some decorative arts. But every now and then, a woman would break through, much like a daisy pushing through cobblestones, leaving a mark that was hard to ignore. Take the case of Artemisia Gentileschi, a Baroque painter who, while slightly post-Renaissance, exemplifies the struggles and triumphs of women in the arts. Not only did she challenge societal norms by pursuing a career dominated by men, but she also used her art as a form of personal expression, often depicting strong and defiant women. Her story is a testament to the fact that, even in a world that relegated them to the sidelines, women found ways to wield a brush with authority. But let's not kid ourselves. For the majority of women, the Renaissance workshop wasn't a place of opportunity. Gender roles were as fixed as the stone statues that adorned city squares. While women could assist in family-run workshops, they were rarely, if ever, formally acknowledged. This wasn't due to a lack of talent. Far from it. It was the social mores of the time, dictated by patriarchal structures as old as the Roman ruins they walked past daily. Now, while we're on the subject of societal structures, let's talk about those apprenticeships. Imagine signing a contract that binds you tighter than a pair of period-accurate hose. Apprenticeships in the Renaissance were legal agreements as detailed as a modern-day prenup, dictating everything from the duration of your servitude, usually about 3 to 7 years, to the nitty-gritty of your daily tasks. In return for your labor and unquestioning obedience, you'd receive room, board, and the invaluable opportunity to learn a trade. It was like signing up for a university course where the tuition was paid in sweat equity and the graduation ceremony was a handshake and a pat on the back. Apprentices weren't just bound by these contracts. They were often bound to secrecy, especially when it came to workshop techniques. This brings us to the surprisingly modern concept of intellectual property. You see, back in the day, techniques were closely guarded secrets, as valuable as the gold leaf adorning a patron's portrait. If you were caught spilling the beans on your master's unique method for mixing a particular shade of green, you might find yourself facing more than just a stern reprimand. These trade secrets were the lifeblood of the workshop, and keeping them under wraps was as crucial as the art itself. But let's spice things up a bit with some political intrigue, shall we? Enter the Pazzi conspiracy, a plot so juicy it could have been penned by Machiavelli himself. In 1478, the Pazzi family, in cahoots with none other than the Pope, hatched a plan to overthrow the Medici, a move that could have sent shockwaves through the halls of power and the corridors of workshops alike. The botched assassination attempt on Lorenzo de' Medici during Mass was the Renaissance equivalent of a failed coup d'etat, and the repercussions were felt far and wide. So, how did this political drama impact the everyday grind of our Renaissance artisans? Well, for starters, a conspiracy of this magnitude had a ripple effect on patronage. With the Medici's power momentarily threatened, those who had aligned themselves with the family suddenly found themselves in a precarious position. Commissions could dry up faster than a summer river in Tuscany if you were seen as a Medici sympathizer after the conspiracy. And let's be real, no one wants to be caught on the wrong side of a knife-wielding pope's favor. Moreover, in the chaos that followed the conspiracy, there was a tightening of allegiances. Workshops that had previously been neutral now had to pick sides, often aligning with the Medici to secure their economic future. The air was thick with suspicion and fear, and artisans had to tread carefully or risk losing more than just commissions. They could lose their lives. Political affiliations became as much a part of an artist's toolkit as brushes and chisels. In this tense atmosphere, the concept of reputation took on a new level of urgency. An artisan's livelihood depended not just on skill, but on the ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Florentine politics. Aligning with the right patron could make or break a career faster than you can say, Pazzi conspiracy. And while the romantic notion of the artist as a tortured soul toiling away in solitude persists, the reality was a complex dance between art, politics, and survival. As you ponder these intricacies, remember that every brushstroke in a Renaissance workshop was more than just an exercise in aesthetics. It was a calculated move in a game where the stakes included not only fame and fortune, but also the very real possibility of falling from grace. The workshop was a microcosm of the larger world, reflecting the aspirations, struggles, and ambitions of an era that continues to captivate us today. And so, as the stars twinkle over Florence, casting their ancient light on a city steeped in history and ambition, you find yourself part of a grand narrative. You're not just an observer, you're a participant in a story that transcends time, where each day is a new chapter in the ever-unfolding tale of the Renaissance. Whether you're mixing pigments or navigating the treacherous waters of political intrigue, remember that you're contributing to a legacy that will echo through the corridors of history long after the last candle has flickered out. As the stars twinkle over Florence, casting their ancient light on a city steeped in history and ambition, it's time to shift our gaze to the legacy of those Renaissance workshops. They were more than just artistic assembly lines. They were the crucibles in which modern art and craftsmanship were forged. Think of them as the original art schools and studios, long before the term studio apartment meant paying a fortune for a broom closet in Brooklyn. Fast forward to today, and you'll find the fingerprints of the Renaissance all over the art world. The concept of the master-apprentice relationship has evolved into structured art education programs, but the core remains the same. An intense focus on technique, discipline, and yes, a fair amount of grunt work. Modern art schools owe much of their DNA to the likes of Botticelli and his ilk, who believed that mastering the fundamentals was the only path to true artistic freedom. So the next time you hear an art student moaning about their life drawing class, remind them they've got it easy compared to their Renaissance counterparts, who had to grind their own pigments before they could even think about sketching a nude. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of these workshops is the Renaissance's obsession with perfection, a fixation that continues to haunt artists like an overzealous gym coach. Back then, art wasn't just about self-expression. It was a quest for the divine, a way to touch something eternal. The meticulous attention to detail, the pursuit of harmony and balance, these were more than artistic choices. They were a reflection of a worldview that saw the universe as an intricate, ordered system. Today, this quest for perfection manifests in everything from the pixel-perfect designs of a digital artist to the painstaking precision of a watchmaker. It's as if the Renaissance left us with a collective itch for flawlessness, one we're still trying to scratch. Now, let's debunk a persistent myth. The idea that Renaissance artists were solitary geniuses. Sure, the notion of the lone artist toiling away in a garret has its romantic appeal, but the reality was far messier and more communal. These workshops were bustling hubs of collaboration, where ideas were as freely exchanged as gossip at a royal court. Michelangelo, for instance, didn't sculpt David in isolation. He was surrounded by a team of assistants, each contributing to the final masterpiece. It was less about individual genius and more about collective effort, a fact often glossed over in favor of the more tantalizing myth of the solitary artist. But why does this myth persist? Perhaps it's because we love the idea of the lone genius, the misunderstood artist who sees the world differently. It's a narrative that appeals to our sense of individuality, even if it doesn't quite align with historical reality. The truth is, art has always been a joint endeavor, a dialogue between the artist and their environment, shaped by the social, economic, and political forces of the time. Understanding this doesn't diminish the genius of a Da Vinci or a Raphael. It enriches it, placing their achievements in the context of the vibrant, interconnected world they inhabited. And let's spare a thought for the economic engine that powered this artistic renaissance. Florence wasn't just a city of artists. It was a bustling commercial hub, where art and commerce were as inseparable as the strands of a double helix. Patrons like the Medici didn't just fund art for art's sake. They saw it as an investment, a way to bolster their status and influence. Every masterpiece was a calculated gamble, a high-stakes game where reputation and resources were the chips on the table. In this way, the Renaissance workshop was as much a business as it was an artistic enterprise, a fact that might deflate the romanticism, but adds a layer of gritty reality to the narrative. As we wrap up this journey through the Renaissance workshop, it's worth reflecting on why this period continues to captivate us. Perhaps it's because it offers a tantalizing mix of romance and reality, a world where sublime beauty was crafted amidst the clamor and chaos of everyday life. It's a reminder that art is both an escape from the world and a reflection of it, a dance between the ideal and the real. And while the tools and techniques may have evolved, the essence remains unchanged. A relentless pursuit of beauty and meaning, a quest as old as humanity itself. So, as you ponder the legacy of the Renaissance, remember that it's more than a collection of dusty artifacts in a museum. It's a living tradition, a continuous thread woven into the fabric of modern art and craftsmanship. Whether you're an artist, a craftsman, or simply someone who appreciates a well-crafted piece of work, you're part of this grand narrative, a story that stretches from the cobblestone streets of Florence to the bustling avenues of today's creative capitals. In the end, the Renaissance workshop was a crucible of creativity, a place where the limits of human potential were constantly tested and expanded. It's a legacy that endures, not just in the masterpieces that fill our galleries, but in the very way we approach the act of creation. So the next time you pick up a brush, a chisel, or even a digital stylus, remember that you're standing on the shoulders of giants, part of a lineage that stretches back centuries. As the final brushstrokes of this story dry, take a moment to appreciate the intricate tapestry of history, woven from threads of ambition, talent, and a touch of divine madness. It's a reminder that while the myths may enchant us, the reality, with all its grime and glory, is what truly inspires. And so, as you close the book on this chapter, remember that the spirit of the Renaissance lives on, not just in its art, but in every act of creativity that seeks to capture the beauty of the world in all its complexity. Underneath the blazing sun of the 12th century Middle East, a time when kingdoms fell as quickly as they rose, the stage was set for the birth of a dynasty that would leave an indelible mark on history. Amidst this backdrop of chaos and ambition, the Ayyubid dynasty took root, driven by the actions of a man whose name would echo through the ages, Saladin. Let's begin with the political jigsaw puzzle of the period. The region was a patchwork quilt of alliances and enmities, with every stitch threatening to unravel at the slightest provocation. Here, sultans were less worried about ruling their lands and more preoccupied with keeping their heads. The Crusaders were constantly on the prowl, eager to spread their influence like medieval Instagram influencers desperate for likes. Meanwhile, the Fatimid Caliphate was on the decline, and the Seljuk Empire was fraying at the edges. It was a game of thrones, Middle Eastern edition, and everyone was vying for the Iron Throne. Only it was made of the spoils of war, not swords. Amidst this tumult, in the year 1137, Saladin was born in the town of Tikrit, in present-day Iraq. Tikrit was hardly a peaceful backwater. It was more like the Wild West, where family ties were as binding as a knight's code of honor, until they weren't. Saladin's family, the Ayyubids, were Kurdish and had served various masters, proving their loyalty was as flexible as a yoga instructor at a retreat. Saladin's early years were marked by enough family drama to fill a week of daytime television. His father, Najm ad-Din Ayyub, and his uncle, Shirkuh, were military men serving the Zengids, led by the formidable Nur ad-Din. When the family was forced to leave Tikrit under a cloud of scandal, details as juicy as a medieval tabloid, Saladin's father found service under Nur ad-Din in Marseille. Picture a medieval LinkedIn profile, skilled in military strategy, adept at navigating political minefields. Nur ad-Din, now there's a character worth mentioning. He was a ruler who had mastered the fine art of balancing power with religious zeal. His vision was to unite the Muslim world against the Crusaders, a noble goal that required the deftness of a juggler with too many balls in the air. Enter Saladin, who, under Nur ad-Din's mentorship, learned the ropes of leadership and the complexities of war. Talk about a medieval internship program with some serious perks. But let's not forget the economics of this whole affair. Warfare in the 12th century was as much about numbers and logistics as it was about valor and swords. The staggering costs of maintaining an army were akin to running a modern-day tech startup without the benefit of venture capitalists. Funding an army required a steady flow of gold, silver, and resources, and the price tag was often paid in blood and coin. Saladin, with his knack for fiscal finesse, would later become a master at this economic sleight of hand. He understood that winning a war was as much about the treasury as it was about the battlefield. Saladin's rise to power was not a meteoric ascent, but a carefully plotted journey. As he served under Nur ad-Din, he honed his skills, building alliances and gaining the respect of his peers. He learned to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, where a misplaced word could be as deadly as a poisoned dagger. His military campaigns were marked by strategic brilliance, but also by a pragmatism that kept his forces well-fed and well-equipped. In a world where many rulers played the short game, Saladin was always thinking several moves ahead on this grand chessboard of empires. As we delve deeper into Saladin's story, it becomes clear that his legacy was not just forged on the battlefield, but also in the corridors of power. His ability to unify the fractured Muslim states was not just a feat of military might, but of diplomatic genius. His legacy would be one of unity and strength, a testament to the power of vision and leadership in a world rife with discord. So, here we have Saladin, a man who rose from the tumult of his early years to become a beacon of hope for his people. A leader who understood that sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword, but having both in your arsenal is never a bad idea. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tale of the Ayyubid dynasty, a saga of ambition, warfare, and the quest for a legacy that would stand the test of time. Now, let's zoom in on the year 1187, when Saladin's military acumen was about to get its big break. We're talking about the siege of Jerusalem, a pivotal moment that was less about valiant knights in shining armor and more about the gritty, harsh realities of medieval warfare. Forget the Hollywood glamour. This was no medieval movie set. It was raw, it was brutal, and it was as strategic as a grandmaster's chess game. First things first, let's address the myth of chivalry. Yes, the idea of honorable knights and noble crusaders is as enticing as a blockbuster trailer, but the truth is far less poetic. Warfare in the 12th century wasn't just about grand charges and gallant heroics. It was about survival, plain and simple. Saladin knew this all too well. His strategy was not to engage in endless bouts of bloody combat, but to outmaneuver and outthink his opponents. It was like playing a game of Risk with real stakes, territory, power, and survival. During the siege, Saladin's tactics were as modern as they were effective. Instead of storming the city walls head-on, he employed a strategy of attrition. He surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and waiting for the defenders to exhaust their resources. In essence, he turned patience into a weapon. This wasn't a hastily thrown-together siege. It was meticulously planned. Saladin knew that a direct assault would be costly, both in terms of men and resources, so he opted for a more sustainable approach. Speaking of resources, let's talk logistics. Saladin's army was like a medieval version of Amazon Prime, needing to keep the supply chain running smoothly. The army was composed of thousands of troops, each requiring food, water, weapons, and shelter. Feeding an army wasn't just about hunting and foraging. It was a full-scale operation involving the gathering and distribution of resources over vast distances. The cost of maintaining such an army was astronomical, with expenses running into the equivalent of millions in today's currency. It was a balancing act of epic proportions, with every dinar carefully counted and every supply meticulously accounted for. But Saladin wasn't just a military strategist. He was a savvy economist, too. He understood that war was not just about swords and shields, but also about the coin. His campaigns were financed through a combination of state revenues, loans, and of course, the spoils of war. He knew that to keep the machine running, he needed to ensure a steady influx of resources, whether through taxation or conquest. His economic policies were as much a part of his military strategy as his battlefield maneuvers. As the siege progressed, the defenders of Jerusalem found themselves in dire straits, with supplies dwindling and morale sinking faster than a stone in a pond. It was only a matter of time before the city would have to capitulate. Saladin's patience paid off on October 2, 1187, when Jerusalem surrendered. But here's where reality diverges from the legend. Unlike the Crusaders' brutal sack of the city in 1099, which was less a military victory and more a massacre, Saladin's entry into Jerusalem was marked by a degree of restraint unusual for the time. He allowed for the peaceful evacuation of civilians, a move that, while strategic, also highlighted a rare moment of mercy in an era known for its ruthlessness. This act of clemency wasn't just about magnanimity, it was also a calculated political move. By presenting himself as a just and merciful leader, Saladin aimed to win hearts and minds, not just territories. His actions were as much about consolidating power as they were about showcasing a new form of leadership. In a time when rulers often wielded fear as a weapon, Saladin understood the power of a different kind of influence, a legacy built on respect rather than terror. So, let's debunk another myth. While Saladin is often romanticized as a chivalrous knight in the Western imagination, the truth is far more complex. He was a leader who understood the brutal necessities of war, but also recognized the power of diplomacy and mercy. His legacy is not one-dimensional. It's a tapestry of strategy, economics, and political acumen. And speaking of legacies, Saladin's victory at Jerusalem was a game-changer. It marked a turning point in the Crusades, shifting the balance of power in the region and laying the groundwork for future conflicts. The victory wasn't just a military triumph. It was a strategic masterstroke that redefined the geopolitical landscape of the time. Saladin's success at Jerusalem was a testament to his vision and leadership, qualities that would continue to shape the history of the Middle East long after his time. As we continue to unravel the intricate story of the Ayyubid dynasty, it's clear that Saladin's legacy is not just about battles won or territories conquered. It's about a legacy built on vision, strategy, and an understanding of the human condition that transcends the brutality of war. The siege of Jerusalem in 1187 was not just a chapter in history. It was a turning point that would echo through the ages, shaping the destiny of empires and the course of history itself. And just as Saladin was basking in the glow of his Jerusalem triumph, he knew the real work was just beginning. You see, holding onto power in the medieval Middle East wasn't just about winning battles. It was about keeping everyone else from toppling your carefully constructed house of cards. Saladin had the foresight to realize that while swords and sieges could win cities, it was diplomacy that would keep them. Enter the political chess game of alliances and treaties, where Saladin played not just to win, but to keep everyone else from flipping the board. Picture him not as a knight in shining armor, but as a poker player with a killer poker face, knowing when to hold em, when to fold em, and when to call a bluff. His diplomatic strategies were as intricate as the patterns on a Persian rug, weaving through the tangled loyalties of the time. The Crusaders weren't just going to pack up their tents and head home because Saladin asked nicely. He had to deal with a motley crew of European nobles who couldn't even agree on what to have for breakfast, let alone a unified strategy against him. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli were all in the mix, and Saladin knew that playing them against each other was as essential as any siege engine. It was a delicate dance of deception and alliances, with Saladin leading the waltz. Now, let's talk numbers. because nothing spells out the realities of medieval politics like cold, hard data. Take the Battle of Hattin in 1187, a masterclass in Saladin's strategic genius. On July 4th, the Crusader forces, led by Guy of Lusignan, found themselves caught between a rock and a very dry place, the arid plains near the Horns of Hattin, to be precise. Saladin's forces numbered around 30, including cavalry and infantry, while the Crusader army was a leaner force of about 20, They were outnumbered, but more critically, they were outmaneuvered. The Crusader army, already parched and demoralized, faced a tactical nightmare. Saladin had positioned his troops to block access to the precious water sources, essentially turning the battlefield into a pressure cooker without a release valve. It was less about the clash of swords and more about the suffocating grip of dehydration and desperation. This was a medieval game of chicken, with Saladin holding a full house while Guy of Lusignan was left with a pair of twos. And let's not forget the logistics of this operation. Marching an army of tens of thousands across the desert wasn't a weekend picnic. It was a logistical marathon. Saladin's supply lines stretched for miles, with provisions meticulously accounted for. Maintaining such a force wasn't just about keeping them fed and watered. It was about having the resources to pay them, arm them, and keep them loyal. The costs were staggering, with estimates running into the hundreds of thousands of dinars. It was the medieval equivalent of a military-industrial complex, with Saladin as its CEO. The outcome at Hattin was as decisive as it was devastating. The Crusader army was all but annihilated, with thousands captured, including prominent nobles and knights. Guy of Lusignan himself was taken prisoner, a king without a kingdom, and Saladin's victory was complete. But here's where the power of diplomacy came into play. Saladin didn't just round up the survivors and call it a day. He used his victory to negotiate and consolidate his power. By releasing certain prisoners, he secured alliances and brokered peace deals that furthered his strategic goals. This wasn't just about holding territory. It was about reshaping the political landscape to ensure the longevity of his reign. Saladin's diplomatic maneuvers were a study in realpolitik, understanding that sometimes a handshake could be as lethal as a sword thrust. He knew that to sustain his empire, he needed to be as adept in the art of negotiation as he was in the art of war. In the aftermath of Hattin, Saladin's reputation as a military and diplomatic powerhouse soared. But let's debunk the myth of the magnanimous conqueror, shall we? While Saladin's clemency at Jerusalem and his calculated mercy post-Hattin have been romanticized, they were far from acts of pure charity. They were part of a strategy to stabilize his newly expanded realm, to turn former foes into future allies, and to ensure that his rule was not just feared, but respected. This wasn't just a legacy of battles and blood. It was a legacy of balance, between strength and subtlety, between conquest and compassion. Saladin's ability to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics with the deftness of a seasoned mariner ensured that his empire didn't just rise, it thrived. The Ayyubid dynasty was more than just a collection of territories. It was a testament to the enduring power of strategic vision and diplomatic acumen. As we look further into Saladin's story, it's clear that his real genius lay not just in the victories he won, but in the ones he never had to fight. His legacy was not just about the empires he built, but about the peace he brokered. In a world where might often made right, Saladin's legacy was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon in a ruler's arsenal is not the sword he wields, but the alliances he forges. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the fascinating tale of the Ayyubid dynasty, unveiling more about Saladin's legacy and the mark he left on history. If you thought Saladin was simply resting on his laurels after the dust settled post-Jerusalem, you'd be as mistaken as a knight charging a windmill thinking it's a dragon. In fact, the real work was just beginning. Saladin, a man who could navigate the murky waters of medieval politics with the grace of a shark in a fish tank, knew that the heart of his empire needed not just a strong pulse, but a steady rhythm. It was time to get down to the nuts and bolts of governance. First up, administrative reforms. Picture this. It's the 12th century, and running an empire is not unlike herding cats. You've got territories stretching from Egypt to Syria, each with its own set of local customs, languages, and laws. Saladin's solution: centralization, baby. He streamlined governance by appointing loyal family members to key positions. This wasn't just nepotism wrapped in a turban. It was a strategic move to ensure loyalty and efficiency. Saladin's governance style was akin to assembling a medieval IKEA cabinet, complex but ultimately functional. He established a bureaucracy that was both resilient and responsive, ensuring that taxes were collected efficiently and justice was administered uniformly. This was critical, because funding an empire wasn't just about collecting coins. It was about ensuring the flow of resources like grains from the Nile Delta or timber from the Lebanese mountains. A well-oiled administrative machine was the bedrock of stability, and Saladin knew it. Economically speaking, Saladin was no slouch. He understood that an empire is only as strong as its treasury. Maintaining a standing army, constructing fortifications, and supporting cultural institutions required a king's ransom, quite literally. Saladin reformed the tax system, making it more equitable, but also more effective at filling the coffers. He levied taxes on agriculture, trade, and even luxury goods. If you wanted that silk from China or those spices from India, you were going to pay for it, and Saladin made sure of it. Now, let's chat about the myth of Saladin as the paragon of virtue. Sure, the guy's got more fan clubs than a rock star, but was he really as chivalrous as the legends claim? The truth is that while Saladin was indeed magnanimous on occasion, he was also a shrewd, and at times, ruthless ruler. His generosity was often strategic. Take, for instance, his practice of granting lands and titles to loyal supporters. It wasn't just about being nice. It was about solidifying his power base and ensuring that those in his inner circle had a vested interest in the stability of his reign. Saladin's cultural impact was another feather in his cap, though not without its complexities. He was a patron of the arts and education, understanding that soft power could be as effective as military might. He established madrasas, or educational institutions, across his realms. These weren't just schools. They were centers of learning that contributed to the Islamic Golden Age, fostering advancements in science, medicine, and philosophy. But let's not romanticize this too much. These institutions also served to promote his particular interpretation of Sunni Islam, consolidating religious authority under his rule. And what about Saladin the warrior, the man who led countless campaigns against the Crusaders? His ability to keep his military machine running amidst continuous engagements was nothing short of miraculous. He was known to personally inspect his troops, ensuring their readiness and morale. His leadership style was hands-on, a far cry from the aloof monarchs of Europe. This was a guy who led from the front, not from a distant castle. But let's debunk the Hollywood-esque image of Saladin as a flawless hero while we're at it. The reality was far more nuanced. Saladin could be as pragmatic as he was pious. Sure, he prayed and fasted, but he was also a political animal, capable of cold calculations when necessary. His decision to spare Jerusalem's inhabitants, for instance, wasn't just an act of mercy. It was a calculated move to avoid a protracted insurgency and to present himself as a benevolent ruler. So, what's the takeaway here? Saladin's legacy is a complex tapestry of military brilliance, astute governance, and cultural patronage, all woven together with threads of political savvy. He was a man who understood that the sword and the pen were not mutually exclusive, but complementary tools in the pursuit of lasting power. As we delve further, we'll find that Saladin's story isn't just about the battles he fought or the cities he conquered. It's about the empire he built, the reforms he implemented, and the lasting impact of his rule. And just like that, the stage is set for the next chapter in the saga of the Ayyubid dynasty. So stay tuned, because the story of Saladin is far from over. Now, if you thought the Ayyubid dynasty was going to ride high on Saladin's coattails forever, well, you're in for a plot twist sharper than a Damascus blade. You see, maintaining an empire isn't like holding onto a trophy. It's more like trying to keep a hot air balloon afloat with a slow leak. Saladin's successors found this out the hard way as the dynasty faced internal strife and external pressures that would make even the steadiest ruler reach for the medieval equivalent of a stress ball. First, let's talk family dynamics. Saladin's sons and nephews inherited not just his lands, but also his ambition, unfortunately, without his knack for unity. The Ayyubid family gatherings were less family reunion, and more who's plotting against whom this week. Saladin had crafted a realm that stretched from Egypt to the Levant, But when he passed in 1193, his empire was divided among his kin. Picture a pie being sliced up, except each slice is a kingdom, and the people holding the knives are more interested in the size of their piece than the pie as a whole. These divisions weren't just about power. They were also about economics. Saladin's successors faced the daunting task of sustaining a sprawling empire with an economy that was stretched thinner than a pauper's purse. Saladin had been a master at balancing the books, but his heirs struggled with the financial burden of maintaining armies, infrastructure, and courtly expenditures. The treasuries were like an overdrawn bank account, with each sultan trying to make ends meet by taxing the populace or minting more coins, which is a fancy way of saying inflate the currency and hope nobody notices. The economic strain wasn't just an internal issue. External pressures from rival factions and persistent crusader states meant that the Ayyubids needed a robust defense, which only added to the financial woes. The military machine that Saladin had so meticulously maintained started to show signs of rust as resources became more scarce and morale among the troops dipped. Soldiers, after all, weren't just fighting for glory. They expected to be paid, fed, and perhaps not left standing in the scorching sun without proper equipment. And speaking of rivals, the Ayyubids faced a geopolitical landscape that was as treacherous as a snake pit. The Crusaders, although beaten back, were like weeds in a garden, persistent and always popping up where least expected. The once unified front that Saladin had presented against the Crusaders began to fracture, with each Ayyubid ruler more concerned about their own domain than the larger picture. The result was a series of skirmishes and lost territories that chipped away at the empire's strength. Let's fast forward a bit to the mid-13th century, when the Ayyubid dynasty was teetering on the edge. The Mongols were on the move, like an unstoppable force of nature sweeping across the steppes. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Mamluks, a group of slave soldiers who had risen through the ranks, were eyeing the throne with the kind of ambition that comes from knowing you're the one holding the sword. By 1250, the Mamluks had usurped power, marking the official end of the Ayyubid dynasty in Egypt. It was a classic case of the caretakers becoming the rulers, a medieval version of the intern taking over the company. So, what about Saladin's enduring legacy? Why does his name still resonate like a rock star of the medieval ages? Part of the allure lies in the carefully crafted image of Saladin as the noble and chivalrous leader, a narrative that has been polished to a shine by centuries of storytelling. He was the Muslim leader who respected his enemies, spared Jerusalem, and was more interested in building an empire than in its destruction. It's an appealing myth, no doubt, but like all myths, it glosses over the complexities of the real man. Saladin's real genius lay in his ability to combine military might with strategic diplomacy. He was a ruler who understood that winning battles was only half the battle, so to speak. His talent for negotiation and his ability to harness the diverse resources of his empire were critical to his success. Yet, these are the nuances that often get lost in translation when history is boiled down to a series of memorable soundbites. So, what modern lessons can we draw from Saladin's life? Perhaps it's the importance of balance between power and mercy, ambition and pragmatism. Saladin's story is a reminder that leadership is not just about conquest, but about the vision to see beyond the battlefield. It's about understanding that an empire is not merely a collection of lands, but a complex tapestry of people, resources, and policies that require constant attention and adaptation. And let's not forget the PR spin that has endured through the ages. Saladin's image as the noble knight of the East has been romanticized in Western literature and media, often at the expense of the harsher realities of his reign. It's a testament to the power of narrative that Saladin is remembered not just as a conqueror, but as a cultural icon, a figure who embodies the ideals of chivalry, even if the reality was far more intricate. In the end, the Ayyubid dynasty's decline serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of disunity and economic mismanagement. It's a story of how even the mightiest empires can falter when internal discord and external pressures collide. Yet, amidst the decline, Saladin's legacy endures, not because he was perfect, but because he represented a rare blend of strength and sagacity, a leader who left an indelible mark on history. As we close the chapter on the Ayyubid dynasty, Remember that history is never just about the past. It's a reflection of the timeless dance between power and principle, ambition and humility. And in that dance, Saladin remains one of history's most intriguing partners, a figure whose story continues to captivate and inspire. So, the next time you hear his name, think not only of the myth, but also of the man, with all his complexities and contradictions. Because in the end, that's what makes history so endlessly fascinating. In the humid, tropical heart of Mesoamerica, where the air feels thick enough to slice with a jade blade, the ancient Maya were busy creating a civilization that would leave Indiana Jones drooling with envy. Here, in this land of dense jungles and towering pyramids, every day was a high-stakes game of power, politics, and maze. And if you think modern politics is tangled, you haven't met the Mayan priests, the real MVPs of their society, who were pulling the strings long before any puppet show hit the stage. Let's start with the geography, because location isn't just a mantra for real estate agents. The Maya occupied a sprawling region that now covers southeastern Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador. Imagine a civilization as complex as a soap opera, spread over 125,000 square miles of varied landscape, from the steamy lowlands of the Yucatan Peninsula to the cooler highlands of the Guatemalan Sierra Madre. This diverse environment was the backdrop for a society that, at its peak, boasted an impressive population of around 10 million people. That's more than the current population of Sweden, all thriving without the help of social media influencers or reality TV. Now, let's talk about the real power players of the Maya world, the priests. These weren't your run-of-the-mill, Sunday sermon types. Mayan priests were the rock stars of their time, wielding influence that would make even the most seasoned political strategist take notes. They were the elite class, the gatekeepers of knowledge, and the intermediaries between the gods and the people. Their influence seeped into every aspect of Mayan life, from agriculture to warfare to the whimsical art of human sacrifice. Yes, you heard that right. While today's influencers might sacrifice a few hours of sleep for a TikTok trend, Mayan priests were making offerings of a more permanent nature. But before you start picturing these priests as medieval villains in feathered hats, let's break down their role a bit more. They were the spiritual leaders who orchestrated elaborate rituals to appease the gods. You see, the Maya believed their gods were a bit high maintenance. Keeping them happy required a steady diet of ceremonies, offerings, and the occasional bloodletting. And who better to manage these divine demands than the priests, with their encyclopedic knowledge of the cosmos and a calendar system that makes our Gregorian version look like a sticky note reminder. Mayan priests weren't just concerned with the heavens, though. They had their feet firmly planted in the earthly matters of politics and economics. They advised kings, dictated the agricultural calendar, and even influenced trade agreements. In a society where the line between religion and politics was as blurred as your vision after a few too many margaritas, the priests were the ultimate multitaskers. And in a world where resources like jade, obsidian, and cacao beans were as valuable as gold and silver, having a priest on your side was like having the ultimate cheat code. Speaking of resources, let's dig into the economic engine that powered this civilization. Agriculture was the backbone of the Mayan economy, with maize being the superstar crop. It's not just a side dish for a backyard barbecue. It was the very lifeblood of the Maya, woven into their myths and daily sustenance. But growing maize in the jungle wasn't exactly a walk in the park. It required slash-and-burn techniques and a whole lot of manpower. Think of it as the ancient Mesoamerican version of CrossFit, with a side of spirituality. Trade was another pillar of Mayan society, and these folks were the original globetrotters. Their trade networks stretched far and wide, connecting city-states and facilitating the exchange of goods like pottery, textiles, and the aforementioned cacao. Yes, my friend, the Maya were sipping on chocolate drinks long before it became a hipster favorite. They were also trading in more exotic luxuries like Quetzal feathers and marine shells, items that were as much about status as they were about utility. In a way, the Mayan economy was as complex as a modern stock market, minus the suits and confusing jargon. And let's not forget the resources that fueled their rituals. Jade, with its mesmerizing green hues, more than just pretty stones for the Maya. It was sacred. It adorned the bodies of the elite and was used in offerings to the gods. Obsidian, the volcanic glass that could be sharper than your wit, was another prized resource, used for tools, weapons, and ceremonial items. The Maya were masters at turning natural resources into symbols of power and spirituality, blending the mundane with the mystical in a way that still captivates us today. In this complex tapestry of life, the Mayan priest stood at the center, orchestrating the symphony of society with a mix of charisma, knowledge, and a dash of divine authority. They were the guardians of tradition, the keepers of cosmic secrets, and the architects of rituals that, while strange to our modern sensibilities, were vital to the Mayan worldview. So, as you drift into a world of dreams, remember that the ancient Maya were living a reality where every day was a dance between the earthly and the divine, with the priests leading the way. And speaking of dances, let's shimmy over to one of the most mind-bending aspects of Mayan life, their calendar system. We're not just talking about a flip calendar with picturesque jungle scenes here. Nope, the Maya took timekeeping to an entirely different dimension, with a celestial twist that would have made even Stephen Hawking raise an eyebrow. The Mayan calendar was a triple threat: the Tzolk'in, the Harb, and the Long Count, each more intricate than a Swiss watch. The Tzolk'in was a 260-day calendar, possibly inspired by the human gestation period or the cycle of Venus, depending on which theory tickles your fancy. Meanwhile, the Harb was a 365-day solar calendar, which is just a tad more familiar to us Gregorian disciples. But hold on to your hats, because the Long Count was where the Maya really flexed their mathematical muscles, predicting cycles that stretched over thousands of years. You might be wondering how these ancient timekeepers managed to pull it off without so much as a calculator app. Well, my friend, they were using their noggins and a whole lot of observation. The Maya were expert astronomers, keeping a close eye on the movements of the stars, planets, and those pesky solar eclipses. Their calendar was more than just a way to mark time. It was a tool for predicting agricultural cycles, planning religious festivals, and, as you might expect, keeping the gods in the loop. In a society where the harvest could mean the difference between feast and famine, knowing exactly when to plant and when to pray was as crucial as finding a decent Wi-Fi signal today. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the Mayan calendar is often hailed as a marvel of ancient wisdom, it's also been the subject of some modern-day myths that are about as believable as a reality show romance. Remember the whole 2012 apocalypse thing? Yeah, that was based on a misinterpretation of the Long Count calendar. Spoiler alert, the world didn't end, and the Maya never actually predicted it would. Their calendar was cyclical, meaning it was more about renewal than destruction. So, sorry, doomsday preppers, but the Maya weren't planning a global reset. Now, back in the day, these calendars gave Mayan priests a serious edge. Imagine being the only person in town who knew when the rainy season would come or when the next solar eclipse would spook the locals. That's power, my friends. The priests used this knowledge to orchestrate elaborate rituals, aligning them with celestial events to ensure maximum divine approval. It's like scheduling your wedding on a full moon for that extra magical touch, but with way more bloodletting and fewer drunken speeches. These rituals weren't just about pleasing the gods, though. They were political theater, a way for the priests to reinforce their status and keep the people in line. After all, if you can predict an eclipse, who's going to question your advice on next season's maize crop? The priests' mastery of the calendar made them indispensable advisors to the rulers, and in a world where religion and politics were as intertwined as a plate of spaghetti, they were the ultimate power brokers. But let's not forget the practical side of things. Agriculture was the backbone of the Mayan economy, and knowing when to plant and harvest was crucial. The calendar helped ensure that the crops were sown at the right time, which in turn guaranteed a stable food supply. And in an age where the phrase food security wasn't just a buzzword, this was a big deal. It meant the difference between a thriving society and one that was ripe for collapse. Yet, for all their brilliance, the Mayan priests and their calendars weren't infallible. Nature, as we know, has a way of throwing curveballs. Droughts, floods, and other natural disasters could disrupt even the most well-laid plans. And while the priests might have been able to predict celestial events with impressive accuracy, they couldn't control the weather. When things went south, it was often the priests who had to scramble to explain why the gods seemed to be in a bit of a mood. So, As we marvel at the Mayan calendar and the priests who wielded it like a cosmic toolkit, let's remember that their lives were a balancing act between the predictable and the unpredictable, the divine and the mundane. They were part astronomer, part politician, and part showman, navigating a world where time was as much about power as it was about prophecy. As we move forward in our journey through Mayan history, keep in mind that these were real people living complex lives, not just characters in an ancient drama. And while their rituals might seem strange to us now, they were a vital part of a society that understood the value of knowledge and the power of belief. Now that we've marveled at the cosmic calculations of the Maya, let's dive into the heart of their most spine-tingling customs, bloodletting and human sacrifice. I know. Just when you thought their calendar was the pinnacle of complexity, along comes a ritual that makes modern horror flicks look like bedtime stories. But before we clutch our pearls and judge too harshly, let's unpack the cultural and religious reasons behind these practices. First off, bloodletting wasn't just a spectacle for the ancient Maya. It was considered a direct line to the gods. Think of it as your spiritual Venmo, except instead of dollars, you're using a more, personal currency. By offering their own blood, the priests and elites believed they were nourishing the gods, who in turn would ensure the continued existence of the world. After all, in a universe where the gods needed regular maintenance, what's a little blood between friends? The practice often involved piercing the tongue, ears, or other body parts with sharp objects made of obsidian or stingray spines. And if your eyes are watering just thinking about it, join the club. These rituals were depicted in the intricate glyphs and iconography left behind by the Maya, where scenes of bloodletting were as common as your aunt's cat photos on Facebook. The priests were typically the ones doing the puncturing, but the nobility also participated, reinforcing their status and divine favor. Now, let's get to the big-ticket event, human sacrifice. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a highly ritualized process with deep religious significance. The Maya believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and human sacrifice was a way to repay that cosmic debt. It was the ultimate offering, a way to restore balance and ensure the cosmos kept spinning. But why human sacrifice, you ask? Well, for the Maya, life was a cyclical process, and death was not the end, but a transformation. Sacrifices were often conducted during significant events, like the dedication of a new temple or the enthronement of a king. The victims, typically prisoners of war or slaves, were seen as messengers to the gods, carrying the hopes and prayers of the Maya beyond the mortal realm. To perform these sacrifices, the Maya employed a method that was as dramatic as it was brutal. The most common form involved a priest cutting open the chest of the victim to remove the heart, which was then offered to the gods. This was usually done on a stone altar atop a pyramid, the blood flowing down its steps like some grotesque riverside painting. If that sounds like a scene from a horror film, it's because it was meant to be awe-inspiring and terrifying, a spectacle that reinforced the power of the priesthood and the divine order. But before we dismiss the Maya as bloodthirsty fanatics, let's consider the practical side of things. These rituals served a very real socio-political purpose. By conducting public sacrifices, the elite could demonstrate their power and control over life and death, effectively keeping the populace in awe and in check. It was political theater with a divine twist, the type of power play that would make Machiavelli proud. The choice of victims was not random either. Captives from rival city-states were often selected, their sacrifice serving as both a religious offering and a political statement. It was a way of saying, we've got the gods on our side, while also discouraging enemy states from getting too ambitious. In a society where warfare was as common as a game of chess, this was a powerful deterrent. As for the iconic pyramids where these sacrifices took place, they weren't just architectural marvels, they were symbols of cosmic order. The steps of the pyramid represented the layers of the universe, from the underworld to the heavens. By performing sacrifices at the summit, the Maya were enacting a cosmic drama, bridging the gap between the earthly plane and the divine. Yet, despite the grandeur, there's no denying the chilling reality of these rituals. It's easy to romanticize the mystique of the Maya, but the harsh truth is that these practices were a part of their everyday life. They were a reflection of a worldview that saw blood as the ultimate offering, a necessary sacrifice to maintain the balance of the universe. And let's not forget the economic angle. Conducting these elaborate ceremonies required resources, costly ones at that. The jade ornaments, the fine textiles, the intricate altars, they all had to come from somewhere. Maintaining the favor of the gods was an expensive business, and it kept the wheels of the Mayan economy turning. The priests, with their knowledge of celestial events and their ability to perform these awe-inspiring rituals, were indispensable in this divine economy. But even the best-laid plans can go awry. When the crops failed or the rains didn't come, it was the priests who bore the brunt of the people's frustrations. After all, if you're claiming to have the gods on speed dial, you'd better deliver results. And when they didn't, it led to social unrest, and sometimes the downfall of entire city-states. So, as we examine these bizarre rituals, let's remember that they were part of a complex system of belief and power. The Maya were masters at turning the mundane into the mystical, and the cosmic into the quotidian. They lived in a world where blood was currency, sacrifice was theater, and the balance of the universe was a daily concern. As we leave the blood-soaked altars of the Maya behind, let's not forget the lessons they teach us about the power of belief, the allure of spectacle, and the eternal human quest for control over the unpredictable. And while their practices might seem alien to us now, the underlying themes of power, politics, and piety are as familiar as the morning news. Stay tuned, as there's more to uncover in the world of the ancient Maya. Now let's drift deeper into the kaleidoscopic world of the Maya, where the line between the earthly and the divine wasn't just blurred, it was downright psychedelic. Yeah, we're talking about the Mayan priest's secret weapon for communing with the gods, hallucinogenic substances. Forget about your artisanal coffee or kombucha. The Maya were brewing up something far more potent. The ancient Maya didn't just dabble in the occasional vision quest. They turned it into a full-blown art form. These priests weren't just content with observing the stars or slicing open a sacrificial victim. They sought direct dialogue with their deities. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want a little chemical assistance when trying to interpret the whims of the divine? Enter the world of hallucinogens, where reality gets a makeover and the spiritual realm feels just a few steps away. So, what exactly were the Mayan priests using to fuel their celestial conversations? Well, the Mayan pharmacopoeia was as diverse as a modern-day pharmacy, minus the sterile lighting and music. They had a whole menu of mind-altering substances at their disposal, each with its own unique flair. One of the most famous was the sacred drink called balshay. Made from the bark of the lanchacarpus tree mixed with honey and water, balshay was like the Maya's version of an energy drink with a psychotropic twist. Forget Red Bull giving you wings. Balshay aimed to give you visions. And then there were the mushrooms. Not the kind you'd toss on a pizza, but the psychotropic mushrooms that could make even the most mundane jungle clearing look like a scene of a Salvador Dali painting. These fungi contained psilocybin, the compound responsible for their hallucinogenic effects. The Maya referred to them as flesh of the gods, which sounds fitting when you're trying to chat with celestial beings. But where did these exotic ingredients come from? You didn't just pick them up at the local market. The Maya sourced these substances from their lush surroundings, tapping into the rich biodiversity of their environment. The Yucatan Peninsula, with its dense jungles, was a veritable treasure trove of botanical wonders. The priests, with their extensive knowledge of flora, were like ancient Tony Starks, concocting powerful elixirs that would make even the most jaded alchemist nod in approval. The physiological effects of these substances were as profound as you'd imagine. Balshay, with its alcohol content and psychoactive properties, was known to induce euphoria, visions, and an altered state of consciousness, perfect for those lengthy conversations with the divine. Psilocybin mushrooms, on the other hand, could lead to intense visual and auditory hallucinations, a sense of oneness with the universe, and occasionally a dose of existential dread. If you've ever questioned the meaning of life after a questionable taco, you get the gist. These substances weren't just for kicks, though. In a culture where the spiritual and the physical realms were as closely knit as a pair of socks, hallucinogens were seen as a conduit to the divine. They allowed priests to transcend the mundane, entering a state where they could receive visions, prophecies, and guidance from the gods. It was like a celestial Zoom call, sans the awkward small talk. But let's not get too carried away romanticizing this chemical communion. The use of hallucinogens was also a highly controlled affair, reserved for the priestly elite and those participating in specific rituals. It wasn't exactly a free-for-all Woodstock in the jungle. The priests knew their stuff, and the substances were administered with precision and purpose. A trip gone wrong wasn't just a personal embarrassment. It could have cosmic repercussions. Now, before you start thinking of these priests as ancient party animals, let's consider the practical side. Use of hallucinogens wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment. It was a tool of political power. By claiming to receive messages from the gods, the priests reinforced their authority and maintained their grip on society. After all, if the guy down the street says he's got God on speed dial, you're probably going to listen to his advice, even if it means sacrificing a few more ears of corn. And then there's the economic angle. These rituals required resources, as lavish as any modern-day festival. The preparation of balchet, for instance, wasn't a simple affair. It involved gathering honey, sourcing the right tree bark, and brewing the concoction just right. This not only required knowledge, but also manpower and time, three things that came with a price tag. But as with any potent substance, there was always the risk of overindulgence. The priests had to walk a fine line between enlightenment and chaos. Too much of a good thing, and you'd find yourself babbling incoherently to your fellow priests, or worse, the gods themselves. And in a society where maintaining a connection with the divine was crucial, losing control wasn't just a personal failing, it was a scandal. Despite the potential pitfalls, the use of hallucinogens played a critical role in Mayan religious life. It was a testament to the lengths the Maya would go to understand their universe and maintain harmony with their gods. And while the idea of priests tripping in the jungle might seem outlandish to our modern sensibilities, it was a vital part of a culture that saw the world through a lens where the mystical and the mundane were one and the same. So next time you sip on your morning coffee or pop an aspirin, remember the Mayan priests and their quest for divine insight. They were navigating a world where every ritual, every vision, and every substance held the potential for power, prophecy, and a profound connection to the cosmos. And while their methods might seem bizarre to us now, the quest for understanding, control, and a little bit of magic is as human as it gets. Stay tuned, because the Mayan adventure is far from over. We've only just begun to peel back the layers of this ancient civilization's fascinating history. And just when you thought the Mayan story was all about psychedelic chats with the cosmos and blood-soaked altars, let's take a sharp turn into the less glamorous, yet equally fascinating decline of their civilization. You see, the Mayan priests were like the rock stars of their day, commanding the stage with charisma and a touch of divine mystery. But even rock stars fall from grace, especially when Mother Nature decides to go off-script. Imagine this. It's the 9th century, and the Mayan world is a bustling civilization, teeming with life and complexity. But beneath the surface, things are starting to crack. Environmental pressures begin to mount, and we're not just talking about a little drought here or a minor crop failure there. No, we're talking about a multi-century climate crisis that would make even the most seasoned meteorologist break a sweat. Between 800 and 1000 AD, the Maya faced a series of severe droughts. And when you're counting on rain to keep your maize fields flourishing, that's kind of a big deal. The lack of water didn't just mean dry crops. It meant dry reservoirs, dry wells, and ultimately dry throats for the millions who called the expansive Mayan territories home. Now, you might think, surely the priests, with their divine heartline and all, could fix this. Ah, but here's the rub. Even the most devout prayers and elaborate rituals can't conjure rain from a cloudless sky. And when the heavens don't deliver, the people start asking some tough questions. The priests, once seen as divine intermediaries, began to look more like snake oil salesmen. After all, if you're claiming to have backstage passes to the divine concert, it's awkward when the headliner doesn't show up. Meanwhile, social pressures were bubbling up like a cauldron over a two-heart fire. City-states that once coexisted in a tangled web of alliances and rivalries started to turn on each other. Imagine Game of Thrones, but with more jade and less steel. As resources became scarce, competition turned to conflict, and warfare wasn't just a pastime, it was a means of survival. The once glorious city-states of Tikal, Kapan, and Palenque saw their influence wane as they were either abandoned or absorbed into the growing chaos. And let's not forget the economic side of things. The Mayan economy, heavily reliant on agriculture and trade, was like a delicate Jenga tower. remove a few pieces, and the whole thing comes crashing down. As trade routes were disrupted by warfare and environmental changes, the flow of luxury goods like jade and cacao dwindled. The priests, who had once dictated the terms of economic prosperity, found themselves unable to deliver the goods, quite literally. In the midst of this upheaval, the very rituals that had once legitimized the priest's power began to lose their luster. Bloodletting and human sacrifices, once seen as essential for maintaining cosmic balance, started to look like desperate gambits to appease increasingly disillusioned gods and people. Imagine trying to host a lavish dinner party with empty cupboards and no guests willing to RSVP. As the Mayan civilization began its slow decline, the authority of the priests crumbled like an ancient temple in an earthquake. The shifting sands of social and environmental change eroded the foundations of their power, leaving behind a legacy of grandeur and mystery, but also a cautionary tale of hubris and adaptation. Their story is a stark reminder that even the most sophisticated systems can falter when the balance between human ambition and the natural world is ignored. Yet despite the decline, the allure of the Mayan rituals and their myths refuse to fade into obscurity. Today, the remnants of their civilization, those stunning pyramids, intricate carvings, and yes, even their blood-soaked altars, continue to captivate our imaginations. They serve as both a testament to human ingenuity and a warning of the perils of ignoring environmental and social cues. And here we are, centuries later, still entranced by their story. The modern fascination with the Maya, fueled by everything from Hollywood blockbusters to conspiracy theories about ancient astronauts, shows that we're still drawn to the romance of a civilization that dared to dance with the divine. Their rituals, while brutal, were an expression of a worldview where the sacred and the secular were inseparable, a concept that, for better or worse, remains a part of our own cultural narrative. So, as you wrap up this journey through the highs and lows of the Mayan civilization, remember that history is more than just dates and dusty relics. It's a living tapestry, woven with threads of ambition, belief, and the ever-present challenge of survival. The Mayan priests, with their cosmic calendars and mind-bending rituals, remind us that the search for meaning and control over our world is as old as humanity itself. And while their civilization may have faded, their legacy endures, etched into the stone of their temples and the stories we tell about them today. As you drift into the realm of dreams, let the lessons of the Maya linger in your thoughts. They were pioneers who reached for the stars, only to be brought down by the very forces they sought to command. In their rise and fall, we find reflections of our own struggles with power, faith, and the ever-changing world around us. Sleep well, knowing that history, like life itself, is a dance between the possible and the inevitable, and the stories of those who came before us are the steps that guide our way.